Let's begin. We have a cavernous room and not as many people. I think there have been a lot of meetings about San Onofre this week, and I know many of you have been to many of them. Also, some people might be on the highways still. I was just on the highway, along with some large fraction of humanity. So thanks to San Diego Planning for that traffic. My name is David Victor. I'm chairman of the Community Engagement Panel, and I welcome you to this meeting tonight. Just a reminder, if there is an emergency and you need to evacuate the building, there are exits out here, and then you go back out the front door the way you came in. There are also exits right behind me. The Oceanside Police Department is here for everyone's safety tonight, and I want to thank the people of Oceanside for welcoming us back to this great facility here. And Councilmember Jerry Kern, who's a member of the panel, is not with us tonight, but I will make sure to thank him for his hospitality. I also want to mention, and we'll talk a little more about this later tonight, as those of you who've been following this closely know, Edison has established a team of experts to help them develop a plan for the removal of the spent fuel from the site and for accelerating the various things, including changes in law that would be needed to make removal of the spent fuel from the site possible. Tonight we have two members of that panel here. One of them, Tom Isaacs. Tom, where are you? Right there, Tom Isaacs, former Office of Policy at the Department of Energy, who is chairman of that panel. Tom and I had a chance to meet and discuss the work of the panel, the work of the Community Engagement Panel in some detail yesterday, and we very much look forward to working with them and also bringing Tom's panel back to future meetings over the course of the next year or so. The other member from that expert panel who's here with us tonight is Gary Lantham, who's right over here. Gary is a specialist on transportation of high-level nuclear waste, among many other things. He was the director of the National Transportation Program for Yucca Mountain Repository. He's going to talk with us later tonight about the theme of tonight's meeting, which is about current practices for used fuel transportation. So Gary, thank you very much for joining us tonight. There are a range of information booths, some from Edison, some from other organizations. Hope you had a chance to take a look at those, and they will be open also during the break. I want to remind everybody that the Community Engagement Panel is a conduit that was set up between Edison and the communities for a two-way flow of information. So it's not a decision-making body. We don't have formal decision-making procedures, but the idea behind it was and is to help Edison understand what members of the communities that are affected by the decommissioning process are concerned about and hearing, and then to help members of the communities affected by the process to learn more about what Edison's actually doing with the decommissioning process. I want to review the agenda for tonight's meeting, which is shown up on the screen here. As we're in the welcoming and opening comments phase of the agenda. We're going to have a few general updates in just a moment, then go to Tom Palmisano's update on decommissioning, and then to Gary Lantham, and then back to some questions before the break. We will, as always, have a public comment period after the break. We've shared. Oh, thank you very much. We've shared the slide deck with the members of the panel, Community Engagement Panel, last week, and it's also, I believe, posted on songscommunity.com. The agenda, along with hard-to-read materials, are all on your chairs. Gary Lantham, I want to particularly thank you for your slides, because you've also beaten Tom's previous record of having hard-to-read slides, and so we've now set a new high water mark. So I want to thank you for that contribution tonight, and all of you have a couple slides from Tom's presentation, which will be Gary's presentation, which will be terrific. The meeting, as always, is being live streamed on Songs Community via songscommunity.com. For those of you watching the live stream, and also for the benefit of our court reporter, please state, members of the panel, please state your name when you're making a comment so that people know who's making which comment. And if you want the floor to make a comment or raise a question, raise your flag like that. If a member of the public would like to make a comment during the public comment period, please sign up on the sheet that's outside as you walked in, and there's already been 20 or so, 25 people who've already signed up, but that will remain open all night, and so if you want the floor, please do that so we have a chance to get those comments. And Dan Stetson and Steve Schwartz will help us collect some of those comments, get responses where possible tonight, and also help organize the list of comments and responses that we, as is custom, put up on the website. We'll talk a little more about that tonight. If you don't want to talk in public about this, but you still have a comment, you can send it to that email address right there within 5 days of the meeting finishing, and it'll be part of the public record, and we'll get responses. And along the way, I will call out various items that need action and so on. So I think that process worked reasonably efficiently. Okay, so let's move now. Let me just first see if anybody in the panel has any questions or comments. So far, I haven't made any major errors in summarizing our agenda. So I just want to talk through a couple slides with some updates about the community engagement panel before we go to Tom Palmisano. So first, I want to just give you a couple updates about things we've observed in the industry. First, about Holtec, which is the company, as you know, that has built the SFC, which is the site where the new spent fuel canisters are being stored, and is providing those canisters. They are also building a consolidated interim storage facility in eastern New Mexico. And that process is moving through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's licensing process, as far as I can tell, all on schedule from the application that was filed in March 2017. And the preliminary schedule suggests that license will be issued in July 2020. I mean, as we've discussed many times at these meetings, we don't see the licensing as the big issue here. The big issue here is the needed change in federal law to make it possible to move spent fuel to a place such as Holtec's facility in eastern New Mexico, or a similar facility that is now being restarted in western Texas. I do want to mention that there's a significant change underway right now in the nuclear industry as more plants are shut. And that change is that firms are emerging that specialize in the decommissioning of nuclear plants. One of those firms is the anchor in the consortium that has the contract for decommissioning the San Onofre plant, and we will, I think, within the next 12 months, have a chance to hear from them in some detail as to what that process is. It's gearing up. Tom will talk more about that. And the other firm that is emerging in this space is Holtec itself, which has purchased the subsidiaries of 3 nuclear plants with the goal of acquiring those licenses, title to the fuel, and basically making a business out of effectively and safely decommissioning plants. And I think it's not surprising that in an industry, the people who build and operate the plant are not necessarily the best people to shut down the plant, and so it's not surprising that consolidation and change is going on inside the industry. It's also looking to acquire a decommissioned SFC, so a spent fuel pad at Big Rock, and there certainly will be others in the future. I don't think that's material to what's going on at this plant, but I thought I would mention this because if you're following the news in the industry, you're seeing a lot of activity about this firm, and the firm's health and the firm's activities are certainly important to us because they're the key partner for the spent fuel pad. Next slide, please. This will be fairly brief because nothing has changed really with the appropriations process since our last meeting. As you know, we need to have a change in federal law that makes it possible, well, it's almost certain that there needs to be a change in federal law to make it possible to reliably ship spent fuel from decommissioned sites like San Onofre to consolidated facilities like in eastern New Mexico and in western Texas. There have been successful efforts inside the House to frame up that change in law. The Senate has been politically much more difficult because, and I would say in particular because of the very close Senate race in Nevada with Senator Heller facing a difficult re-election campaign. And you can be for or against Senator Heller, but we have to face the reality that that means that things that are advantageous to his campaign are happening in the Senate, and that includes not advancing legislation, not advancing appropriations that in any way would be seen as supportive of Yucca Mountain. And that's the reality where we were at our last meeting. That's the reality where we are right now. I've spent some time with folks on the Hill to try and figure out what's going to happen. Nobody knows, because it's not surprising in Washington these days. We have a variety of other dramas unfolding, including a possible government shutdown. There had been quite a lot of hope that during the so-called lame duck session, so this is after the election, but before the new Congress takes over in January, in that period that legislation could advance and a variety of other activities could advance. I'm now sensing growing skepticism about that, in part because the list of things that needs to get done during the lame duck session is very long. So I wish I had a better message and more smiley faces we could put on the message, but that's kind of where we are right now. Meanwhile, these two facilities in eastern New Mexico and western Texas are soldiering on, doing their work. And I think one of the things that's going to be interesting for us to ask the people at those facilities at meetings such as this one early in 2019 is how far can they go before they really need the change in law, because they can continue to work. We can continue to develop the rail car program that we'll hear more about later tonight. So that's the update that I have about the appropriations process. I just want to pause for a moment and see if anybody has anything further to add about that. Next slide, please. The community asks lots of really good questions at all these meetings, and they are gathered and answered. And I just want to flag right now that 6 of them in particular came up during our last meeting that need some detailed answers, and you'll hear from Tom Palmisano some answers to those questions. And Tom will talk a little bit more about other questions that have come up as well, but these 6 that are listed in the top, starting with heat removal from canisters, keep coming up. They're really important and good questions. People have asked and done their homework, and I really appreciate that, and so we're going to get some additional readout on those questions in the public setting in this meeting today. And there's a few other comments below where people have asked questions. For example, can we share notes from the visit to the Holtec factory, 2 visits to the Holtec factory that happened just prior to the previous meeting, and I believe we're in the process of organizing those, and we'll get those put up on songscommunity.com so that if anyone wants to see what it is we discussed, I'll be thrilled to make those notes available, and thanks to Dan and to Marnie and to others who've been working on this. Next slide, please. So before we give the floor to Tom Palmisano, I just want to see if anybody would like to make any additional comments or updates that they think are important for us to share with the community. Okay, Tom Palmisano, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, and welcome everybody. It's good to see the turnout, and we appreciate the interest in decommissioning and the other activities. I've got a shorter than normal presentation, which is generally a good thing. Want to leave plenty of room for Gary on the agenda. He's a true expert in transporting nuclear fuel, so we want to make sure we take advantage of him joining us tonight, and thank you very much for joining us. So I'll be brief. Our decommissioning principles of safety, stewardship, and engagement, we continue to live those every day. This is a new graphic. We've had our 20-year timeline before that is always very difficult to read, so we've tried to simplify that. So very simply, you see we're in the pre-decommissioning work at this point, and we're in the process of moving the spent fuel from wet to dry storage, and I'll status that in a minute. And we're in the CEQA review process with the State Lands Commission. Once that process is done, hopefully in 2019, we will get started on the major decommissioning work, which is about a 9-year window to actually physically remove the plant and structures and remediate the radioactivity. And during that period and extending beyond, all the spent fuel will be in dry storage until there is an opportunity to transfer it off-site, whether that's the Department of Energy under the Nuclear Waste Policy Act or an interim storage facility or some combination. And then towards the end of that period, our plan runs out as far as 2051. We'll transfer the fuel off-site. We'll work with the Navy to determine the end state. If you remember last year, Tom talked to us about what the Navy's ultimate plans will be since it's their land. We'll finish remediating the site. This is the non-radiological part, any substructures that the Navy wants removed, and then eventually we'll turn the land back over to the Navy. And then when the spent fuel's gone, we'll demolish this dry fuel storage facility. So that's a simplified version. This is the version we'll use in the CEP meeting from here out. It's a little simpler to understand. Fuel transfer status to passive dry cask storage. If you remember where we started, we have an existing dry cask storage facility from earlier Unit 1 and 2 and 3 operation with 50 canisters of spent fuel. That's been on site. It was built in 2003, so fuel's been stored there for a period of time. What is in the 2 spent fuel pools, if you go back a year ago, we had 2,668 fuel assemblies. We are now in the process of transferring those to the new facility. We will load 73 canisters, and at the end of the day, mid-2019, have 123 canisters with all the spent fuel stored on site. And the spent fuel pools will be emptied at that point. This is a picture of the new facility. We now have 29 canisters loaded. Each canister holds 37 fuel assemblies, so we will load ultimately 73. So we've made good progress. We do periodically stop. We stopped over the week of Memorial Day to rest the crews. We stopped for crew rest to do maintenance on our equipment. And we're in one of those stops at this point when we completed number 29 last week. I expect we'll restart loading in a week or two. During this time, we do our maintenance. The crews get some time off. And we look back and say, how did it go? What did we learn? We're very deliberate and very cautious about how we do this, and we're always interested in how we could do this better, more safely, more effectively. Areas we've looked at over the time of loading the 29, how we do our welding, how we dry the canisters with helium, how we move the canisters, how we download the canisters into the facility. Downloading is interesting because it's a complicated evolution where you've got to reposition the crane a couple times. So we continue to look for ways to make sure the crews have all the tools they need, all the instructions, and all the training. So that's what we do during these down periods. So we'll continue, and we're on track, as I said, for mid-2019 to complete the offload, at which point you'll see there's 75 spaces there. You'll see 73 loaded with fuel canisters. You'll see 1 spare, and you'll see 1 test location. You may remember I've talked in the past, we committed to have a canister that we will test so we can monitor how it performs and inspect it without fuel in it, so we can prepare to inspect canisters with fuel in the future.
Ted?
Yes, Ted Quinn. I wanted to ask Tom, could you advise on NRC inspection practices during the current stage, and what do you see coming?
Sure, and we've talked about this before. The NRC inspects us quarterly, so they've got a series of inspections they do for a decommissioning site. So they're out quarterly. Then they come out particularly to look at the fuel handling operations. They looked at the start of it very closely. They will come out periodically, generally during their quarterly inspections.
Do they have any reports from those inspections?
Yeah, they issue the reports quarterly. The last report probably is the first quarter report. They just completed the second quarter inspection. It takes them about 60 days to get a report out of their process. Okay. So and those reports are all posted on the NRC website and relatively easy to find.
That sentence has never been spoken before.
Yeah.
Is it possible to put them also, or to
yes,
share?
we can link them from our SONGS community website, so it's easier for you to click a link and get to the SONGS inspection.
Yeah, because the NRC website is a maze.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So moving off of spent fuel, I want to talk about environmental permitting. This is important and it's very current. The State Lands Commission had 2 public meetings this week. Just as a reminder, there's 2 things we really need. First is a certified environmental impact report by the California State Lands Commission under the CEQA Act, California Environmental Quality Act. The next thing we need before we can start the major dismantlement and decommissioning is a coastal development permit issued by the California Coastal Commission. They cooperate on this, so the State Lands Commission is the lead agency. They do their EIR. The Coastal Commission then will rely on that EIR in addition to their other analyses to make a decision on the coastal development permit. What is active right now is the first one. They published the draft EIR for public comment at the end of July. They will close the comment period. I believe they've changed this now to August 30th in the meeting this week, so my slide's a bit out of date. So I believe that's August 30th. They held the 2 meetings, one in Oceanside on the 7th and in San Clemente on the 8th. And then right now, we anticipate that they will consider the final EIR in December 11th in a meeting in San Diego. That's up to them, not us. That's just what I believe their schedule is likely to be. It depends on what they do with the comments they receive. These are important meetings, and as part of public involvement, we wanted to make sure we've advertised before the public comment meetings. Hopefully some of you got there. Want to make sure you know when the public comment period closes, should you choose to make public comments. So please avail yourself of that so you can participate in the State Lands Commission process. Moving on, David has already introduced Tom Isaacs, the chair of our expert team, and Gary Lanthram, our expert team member. The other members, Chris Cummings, background in nuclear engineering and dry cask storage. Allison McFarland, former chair of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, has done a lot of research on siting of geological repositories. Rick Moore, another transportation expert, and Dr. Josie Pacone, who's a radiation monitoring expert. So it's a very robust panel. We're looking forward to that panel interacting with our community engagement panel as a resource.
Let me just report a little more detail on the meeting that Tom Isaacs and I had yesterday, which was in part to identify people and places where we can bring members of this panel back here. In particular, I think I faithfully report what Jerry Kern, Dan Stetson, and I think, which is that we need to have a meeting in early 2019 to refresh on where we are with consolidated storage with these two sites and the strategy that's emerging around that. And so we very much look forward to the experts team helping us talk about that. Thank you.
Yeah, we're excited about the intersection of both the expert team and the community engagement panel. I think it's going to be a great resource to us. Moving on, I want to just tee up spent fuel transportation from a songs readiness perspective as we get ready to hear Gary's view of what it takes to transport spent fuel. So nothing here is new. You've heard me say this before, but it's always good to review this. So what's important is the canister systems we use are licensed for storage and transport. That is important. There are some older plants that have storage-only canisters, and that is a problem when an opportunity to move fuel off-site arises someday. So all of our systems are transportable, and they're licensed by the NRC. We have 3 different systems. We have 2 transnuclear systems, and sometimes you hear these referred to as AREVA. It's AREVA transnuclear. And then we have the Holtec system. So all 3 systems have transportation casks licensed by the NRC to transport our fuel. That's an important factor. The transportation requirements we've included in our canister loading plans. What that means is, in the current canisters we're loading, we take 37 fuel assemblies and put them in. So we had over 2,668 fuel assemblies, so we spent a lot of time picking the 37 assemblies for each canister so they are transportable as early as they can be. So there's some science and engineering behind how you pick which fuel assemblies, so we factored that in. The Department of Energy has been out, and you'll see that on a further slide. We actually have very good rail access at San Onofre. There's a rail spur on site that can be expanded, and it ties into Pacific Sun and ultimately Burlington, northern Santa Fe. There are some plants in the country that don't have ready access to a rail site, so that's problematic for them. So the infrastructure to be able to someday move this fuel, particularly by rail, is important. And I'm going to show you a slide that shows you when our canisters are going to be ready for transportation. So let me show you that again. This is not a new slide. One of the important things the CEP asked us to do is characterize this issue, how it relates to songs. So a couple years ago we built this slide. So the top 2 rows are the 50 canisters that have already been loaded with fuel for a number of years. And what I'm showing here is when these canisters are eligible to be shipped off-site. In dry cask storage business, there's 2 key times. One, you've got to keep spent fuel in the water pool for a period of time, typically 5 years. Then you can move it into dry cask storage. Then ultimately, to move it over public roads or public rail, it's got to decay another period of time, depending on the canister design and the shielding and the transportation cask. So the Unit 2 and 3 spent fuel are in newer AREVA canisters. As you can see, 27 of the 33 canisters are eligible to ship today. If there was a place to ship it, they're eligible to ship today. The remaining 6 will be eligible by the end of 2019. Unit 1 is a different story. This is the old Unit 1, which closed in '92. you can see its canisters take much longer, and the difference is the material in the fuel rods. Unit 2 and 3 have more modern fuel with a material called zirconium in the fuel rods. They don't have to decay as long before they can be shipped. Unit 1 had stainless steel, and it has a higher activation level, a higher radioactivity. It needs to decay 38 years before it can be shipped, which is why you see Unit 2, or Unit 1, which operated, closed in 1992, is all the way out to 2030 for the last 9 canisters. And then the new canister system, you can see out of the 73 will load, by the end of 2020, 67 of the 73 will be eligible to ship. And then you see the remaining 6 mature over the period of time by the end of 2028. The message here, we've talked about permanent repositories and consolidated storage, is we all work to get a location to ship it to that's suitable and approved and licensed and built. We're getting ready on site with the right type of canisters, eligible to ship as soon as something is available. So this timeline matches up when you look at a facility becoming available in a practical time frame. And with that, my pointer's no longer working. Guys, can you advance the slide, please? Okay. A couple other comments. The preparatory work for transportation, I mentioned the DOE has visited the site numerous times, particularly in 2015, looking at our facilities, looking at our transportation casks, and they've documented that in a report. That website is linked right there. This is worth looking at. They look at every closed nuclear plant in the country at the time and write a pretty good report in terms of its readiness to ship fuel. I think the last update was 2016, so this is one I would urge you to look at just for general background in terms of how they've analyzed these sites' readiness to ship fuel.
Can I ask you, first of all, I want to mention that Steve Maharis is in the audience here, and maybe just wave your hand. Steve has been part of the DOE effort in this area and has been instrumental to us on this panel in helping us get access to materials, put questions back to DOE and so on. So I want to thank you again, Steve, for all your contributions. Tom, when do you expect DOE to do another site visit, or are we just going to see kind of annual updates to this report?
I think the update is every 1 to 2 years. We had a visit not long ago which resulted in the 2016 report, so I would expect either this year or next year we'd see another site visit.
Okay.
But DOE management has changed over with the administration, so don't hold me to that. Okay. And with that, that completes my brief overview of the decommissioning status. I'll have more to say later on a couple topics, so thank you.
Thank you very much. So now I want to give the floor to Gary Lanthrum, who's going to talk with us about the main theme of tonight's meeting around transportation of radioactive material. Gary, the floor is yours.
Thanks.
Let me just, while Gary's going up, does anyone have any additional comments or questions to Tom about his overview? I didn't see any agitation in chairs about that subject. So Gary, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I graduated from Oregon State University with a degree in nuclear engineering in 1975. So I've been working in this arena for 43 years now. Unfortunately, my work has been technical in nature. I've been managing some of the engineering aspects, some of the science aspects, and some policy aspects. So I'm not nearly as good a public speaker as either David or Tom. So bear with me, I'll stumble a bit. I've got my cheat sheet notes here, and hopefully they'll keep me on the right path. One of the questions I was asked is why people should care about transportation of spent fuel. For me personally, it's not a bullet on this slide, but I like to know of all the hazards that can affect the area that I live in and what's being done to mitigate those hazards. And that goes for all kinds of things. It goes for stormwater runoff, it goes for transportation of other hazardous materials, and it would go for spent nuclear fuel transportation as well. Spent fuel doesn't get shipped as much as it used to be. I've got another slide coming up. I'll talk about the overall history of shipments. It's been being shipped since the mid-60s. There's been a lot of shipments that have been done. The peak throughput in this country was back in the late 80s, early 90s. Over 100 shipments a year were going on. Now we're down to around between 10 and 20 shipments a year typically. A significant portion of those are Navy shipments, which are kind of invisible because they're national security shipments. But there's an awful lot of research and development that's done on spent fuel from power reactors. They do post-irradiation examination of fuel rods, for example. So small quantities of spent fuel does get shipped fairly regularly. I don't know the specifics about this area, but I doubt there have been any shipments of note in this area. a reason that you all might want to be engaged is because of the things that are changing, the landscape is shifting. Both Tom and David talked about the potential for consolidated spent fuel storage sites. There's a lot of shutdown reactors like Songs, and there's a potential in the next decade or so that number of shipments could start moving from shutdown power plants particularly to those consolidated storage sites. The Song stakeholders have expressed interest in getting the fuel moved off of the site, and that can't be done obviously without transportation. Historically, like I said, the shipments have been going on since mid-60s, 1964. Over 4,000 cask loads of spent fuel have been shipped in this country. Internationally, it's been more than 25,000 shipments, and those shipments haven't just gone by rail and by truck, they've also gone by ship. There are a number of countries like Japan that wants to reprocess their fuel but didn't have a reprocessing capability. So they shipped their spent fuel by ship to France, then it was shipped from the port by rail and by truck to the reprocessing facility, and the reprocessed spent fuel, the high-level waste, was then shipped back to Japan by ship. And so there's been a lot of international transportation as well as the shipments in this country. There have been accidents. There has never been an accident involving spent fuel where the transportation conveyance, the cask, was breached. In this history of 4,000 cask shipments, whoops, can you go back a slide? This book, I've got a link here at the bottom of the slide. It's a report that was put together on the history of all the accidents that have taken place. And if you're interested in looking at details, it's a great reference. It's got a lot of information about every single accident that's happened. The worst one that happened in this country was back in the 70s, I believe. There was a shipment of spent fuel headed to Oak Ridge National Laboratory by truck. The truck was heading down the highway. I believe it was Highway 25. It's a 55-mile-an-hour, two-lane road. And another semi coming the other direction veered out of its lane. The driver of the truck carrying the spent fuel veered off the road to avoid a head-on collision, went down an embankment. The truck skidded for 300 and some feet. It overturned. The skid, basically the brace that holds the spent fuel cask, popped off the trailer. The truck overturned with its trailer and slammed into some trees. The collision killed the driver. The cask was partially buried in a ditch. It ran into the dirt. A team of experts descended on the site fairly quickly. They did radiation surveys. The cask was in good enough condition, even though the truck and the trailer were destroyed. They just cleaned it up and were able to complete the shipment on a different truck to Oak Ridge. That's the most severe accident that's happened. There haven't been other accidents that have come anywhere near close to endangering the cask. So overall, for spent fuel, it's got an enviable safety record. Here's a couple of pictures of the kinds of casks that are used. This is called the M290 cask. It's the cask, the most recent cask that the Navy uses to ship the spent fuel. This was used to defuel the Enterprise aircraft carrier. It completed its decommissioning in Newport News, I believe in 2016. The last of the fuel was shipped. This is called the M290 cask because it weighs 290 tons. It's a very large cask. This cask and the picture around it is a TN Reg cask. It was used to ship spent fuel from West Valley. We did start doing some reprocessing of spent fuel in this country. It was halted during, I believe Johnson stopped it initially, and then Reagan formalized the halt with an executive order. And there was an amount of spent fuel that was shipped to West Valley for reprocessing that was never reprocessed. These casks were used to ship that fuel from West Valley to Idaho. And you can see the workers here. This is a loaded cask. It's got spent fuel in it. These are emergency responders, and they're doing radiation surveys of the surface. They're using a stick with a detector up against the side of the cask to make sure it meets the shipping limits before it leaves West Valley. That shipment was completed successfully. In fact, it was actually completed ahead of schedule. This is an NAC, it's called the STC cask. There aren't many of these casks in this country because there's not a lot of shipments of these large volume canisters going on. This is a cask that NAC sold to China. I believe Holtec is in the process of fabricating some casks that they are also sending to China. China is already consolidating their spent fuel, and they're using U.S. casks for that work. And the last one, this is called an LWT. That's a fancy acronym for legal weight truck cask. It's a much smaller cask. It only holds one fuel assembly, and it fits with its skid, and this is the skid for this cask. You can kind of see the skid on this one, and the skid is really bolted to the rail car on the Navy cask. But this fits inside of a Connex box, and that box can then be put on a ship or on a train or on a truck, and it's light enough to go by truck. Legal weight truck shipments are limited to 80,000 pounds, and so none of these large casks can go by legal weight truck. They could go by heavy haul, which requires special permitting, or by rail. Back in 2006, the National Academy of Sciences, they have an R&D arm called the National Research Council. They did an in-depth study of the safety of shipping spent fuel in this country, and they actually published a book. This is the book itself, and a group paid to have that book available free to the public. It's on the National Academy of Sciences library site, and that's the web link to it, so you can download an e-copy of the book. It's got detailed information about the history of shipping. Their conclusions were basically that there are no fundamental barriers to the safe shipment of spent fuel in this country, and that current U.S. regulations were adequate to provide that safety. And the safety of spent fuel shipments, because of this structure, was several orders of magnitude safer than shipments of other common hazardous materials. And this is a graph from that book.
This graph, I believe, is on your chairs.
So it's a bit of an eye chart challenge. I didn't want to spend a lot of time on it, but the basic idea is that risk is up on the vertical line, and this is a logarithmic scale. So each horizontal line is 10 times riskier than the line below it. So it goes up by a factor of 10 each time. This is the risk associated with spent fuel. This is the risk associated with shipping methanol. This is the risk associated with shipping propane, and the top one is chlorine, which basically says that the shipments of spent fuel has multiple orders of magnitude increased safety over other common hazardous materials. The second graph I have up here is from the actually from the Association of American Railroads. This takes all of the rail shipments of hazardous materials, and there's 9 classes of hazardous material. Spent fuel is part of Class 7, which includes all radioactive materials. And this shows the large volume. It's over 1 million shipments, and that's rail cars, of flammable liquids, over 300,000 shipments of gases. Chlorine falls into the gases classification. The total radioactive shipments was just 8,000. And if you break that down, that includes medical isotopes, it includes industrial isotopes, it includes a whole range of things that are radioactive, not just spent fuel. Spent fuel only accounted for 11 of those 8,000 shipments, and this is data from 2015. The data doesn't change much year to year. The basic breakout for an industrial country like ours is pretty much the same year after year after year. And so you have this convergence of information where each shipment of spent fuel is less risky than shipments of other hazardous materials, and there are far fewer of the shipments in this country. And that will remain true even if Yucca Mountain were to become active and all of the plants across the country were shipping fuel to disposal, to Yucca or to some other repository. There's 3 reasons for this. It's not an accident that the safety record is there for spent fuel shipments. The first pillar is really effective regulations. The second one is really robust package designs. And the last one is enhanced personnel training. It's not just given over to anybody to do. So those are the 3 things that kind of back up the safety record and provide the structure for it. The first bullet here, and again, this is a bit of an eye chart, and this is what David kind of chastised me for, was having too much information, but spent fuel is the only hazardous material where the packaging is required not just to survive normal conditions of transport, it's required to survive severe accidents without breaching the package. It's the only one. Chlorine, anhydrous ammonia, a number of other volatile materials that are poisonous don't have that requirement. So that's a very unique requirement. And it's not just because people are more worried about spent fuel. most other hazardous materials have some corresponding social benefit. If you live in a city, you get chlorinated water out of your tap. That chlorinated water is produced by compressed chlorine gas in rail tanker cars. And so it's got some social benefit, and there's a need to be able to get a lot of that moved around the country constantly. Spent fuel has already given what it's got to contribute to society, the power. It has no further use. And so you don't have to design transport conditions to allow efficient shipment. You design them solely for safety. And it's probably the only hazardous material where safety is the sole concern. There's no corresponding social benefit of trying to maximize throughput. Other things that apply to the regulations is that communities that the shipments are going to be passing through, states and tribes, are pre-notified. They get advance notifications so their safety officials can be ready for the shipment and prepared, know when it's coming. Shipments by rail are speed limited. They can't travel at the same speed as other commodities. Most hazardous materials travel at 80 miles an hour. Spent fuel shipments are limited by rail to 50 miles an hour. There are enhanced inspections of shipments by truck. There's this inspection program called the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance Level 6 inspections. Some states require those inspections each time a truck carrying spent fuel enters their jurisdiction. They stop the truck, they pull over, a CVSA inspection team comes up and does a multi-point safety inspection. For shipments by rail, there is a 27-point criteria that the railroads are required to go through to evaluate the safety and security of those shipments. That data has to be updated on an annual basis, and it's the criteria used to select routes that are used to ship rail shipments of spent fuel. And again, that's something that doesn't apply to all hazardous materials.
Before you move on,
yes.
A year and a half ago, I think, the leadership of this panel wrote a letter to the California Energy Commission asking the Commission to begin the process of figuring out what we needed to do in California to do the regional planning and preparedness and so on because of all the kinds of things you're talking about here.
Sure.
And I would say our impact on the California Energy Commission appears to have been zero, so we'll try that one again. But help us understand what the time scale is to do the regional planning and coordination and so on. I know later in your presentation you're going to talk about the kind of time for the approvals is 6 months to 2
Sure.
years, but it seems like there's a larger process that because nobody's moving commercial spent fuel, nobody's doing that planning. When does that process need to begin?
It's an answer that has two parts because it depends on who's shipping it. Under current regulations, private shipments of spent fuel, there's no requirement for coordination or preparation other than what all states have emergency preparedness crews that deal with a wide variety of hazardous materials. And states get funding through DHS to pursue a wide variety of hazardous material training exercises. The Department of Energy has a special set of training for spent fuel. It's the TEP, it's the Transportation Emergency Preparedness Program, and it's run out of the Department of Environmental Management at the Department of Energy. And they've got a full suite, and I've got a link to that later in the slides, of training information that can be used by states and local communities to prepare for these shipments. When the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, Amendments Act was passed, it included a requirement, it's Section 180C, that the federal government had to provide funding to states, and it's been amended to include tribes because of their sovereign nature, to provide for specific emergency response training for the spent fuel shipments. And there was a commitment in a draft rulemaking that funding would flow 3 to 5 years before the shipments took place. There is not a similar corresponding requirement for private shipments of spent fuel. And so what is done is somewhat up to the shippers. They can work with states and encourage states to tap into things like TEP, this Transportation Emergency Preparedness Program, to get the information that's available. And it's also incumbent on states, if a state knows that there's going to be shipments of spent fuel through its jurisdiction, to maybe shift some of its hazardous material funding over to look at spent fuel rather than focusing on other commodities.
Can I suggest as an action item for Edison, maybe work with us and Gary to sharpen up what the time horizon is here, because we've been operating on the kind of 3 to 5 year concept, but meanwhile time goes on, And in theory, those two facilities could be open in 2022, 2023 to take spent fuel shipments. And so that suggests that if it's really 5 years, that's today.
Right.
So maybe we need to sharpen this up and figure out whether we need to talk more about this.
I can say that those 10 to 20 shipments a year that are going on currently are being done without any specific funding targeting that. So each new shipment program that comes up, there is a degree of coordination that has to be done to make sure that all the parties understand what roles and responsibilities are and what expectations are. Any other comments or thoughts on this slide?
Dan?
A quick question.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Gary. So with reference to the authority
Yes.
of this, if a particular city or county doesn't want it to go through there, do they have veto authority to stop a shipment?
The cities and counties don't. States have some jurisdiction for highway shipments under the Department of Transportation rules under 49 CFR. States can propose alternate routes within their jurisdictions, but they can't block a shipment. And the alternate shipments that they would propose would have to meet all the safety criteria that exist for any shipment. And so you can't just propose an alternate shipment that would be difficult just to block a shipment. It has to meet all the safety criteria.
So what agency has final authority over shipment?
The Nuclear Regulatory Commission ultimately approves the shipments. They have to approve the security plan for the shipments, and the shipment has to be in compliance with DOT requirements. And so there's kind of a split responsibility. The NRC approves the security plan, and the Department of Transportation sets forth the base requirements that you have to meet, and then the package requirements are governed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission again. If you meet all those requirements, there's not a provision for blocking a shipment. It's interstate commerce at that point.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions on this topic before I
Thank you.
click? Okay. The other thing, the next part of the safety protocol is the hardware. Again, unique to hazardous material shipments. Shipments by rail of spent fuel require special rail cars. There's only one of those cars currently operating. I showed the picture of the Navy spent fuel cask a few slides ago. That was one of the new rail cars that meets the Association of American Railroads S2043 operation standard. There's a whole bunch of things in that standard. It provides real-time tracking of important factors affecting the health of the rail car, bearing temperature. The suspension system under rail cars are called trucks. I don't know why they call them trucks. I guess every industry has to have its own set of terminology, and the suspension on rail cars are called trucks. The rail in this country is not really great. It's not always perfectly aligned, and so as trains move down the track, the suspension under the rail cars wobbles back and forth with irregularities in the track, and that's called truck hunting. And so rail cars that ship spent fuel have to have monitoring for truck hunting. And if the truck hunting gets severe, they have provisions for stopping the train or slowing the train, because that contributes to a tendency to derail. And so they track a lot of factors that could affect the ability of the train to stay on the track. Again, that's unique for any hazardous material moved in this country. There were provisions for reduced stopping distance. They had a provision for electro-pneumatic brakes, so that when you hit a brake signal, electricity would send that signal to all of the cars in the train simultaneously. So if you had a 100-car long train, you didn't have to wait for a compressed air signal to travel down 100 cars. They removed that requirement because the length of spent fuel shipments, the trains, for security purposes, will be 3 to 5 CAS cars at the most. They'll be short enough that you don't really get any benefit from the electro-pneumatic brakes. And not many engines that are out there that pull the rail cars had the signaling structure for triggering the electro-pneumatic brakes. So they use just the standard compressed air brakes. But the real-time monitoring of things was a big deal. There is a requirement to do actual surveys of the track that the train will travel down before it goes down for a shipment. That's, again, unique to hazardous material shipments. And then there's that 27-point safety and security criteria the railroads have to go through to approve the shipments before they're done. And this particular rail car that's on this slide is it's a depiction of the Atlas rail car that is being developed by the Department of Energy. It's a 12-axle car. It's a really big rail car. The thing is, I believe, 70-some feet from end to end, 73 feet long. It can't be accommodated on all tracks. Some track has curves that are too tight for this rail car to go down it. But this car has been designed, they've got prototypes built, and they are planning to start testing for these rail cars, I believe, in 2019, if the appropriations provides the funding for it. To fully qualify a rail car to ship spent fuel, to complete the qualification process, 100,000 miles of use is required. And so it's an extensive test program, and they don't require just qualification of the cars. You have to qualify the dynamics of the whole train. And so if you've got 3 cask cars, 2 buffer cars, and a security escort car in a train shipping spent fuel, you have to qualify that. They call it a consist, the arrangement of all the rail cars together. And that makes, again, that's a requirement that's above and beyond what exists for other hazardous materials. DOE is looking at designing an 8-axle car that would be shorter, that could get into more sites, but I don't believe there'd be any challenge getting the 12-axle car into Songs with the straight track that they've got coming into there.
It's my understanding that they have a multi-year appropriation already in place for the rail car testing program, or do they still need an appropriation for that?
I can't answer that question.
I think we'll come back on that. I think they have the appropriation, but just for the testing.
In January of this year, Pat Schwab is the fellow of the Department of Energy that's been heading up the railcar development program. He gave a presentation and seemed to indicate that the testing in 2019 was contingent on funding. I think they had a plan in place, but I don't believe they had the money appropriated.
Okay, we'll get to the bottom of that, and I'll make sure the next note from me to the panel has an update on that. I just, there's so many things that delay.
Oh, yeah.
To have the testing delayed because they don't have money measured in the millions would be nuts. So that's,
I don't disagree. The good thing is that the Navy has cars that they've been using, and there is potential for borrowing cars from the Navy that have already been qualified. And those are also 12-axle cars. They're very large cars. I've got a link on here. I'm going to ask Manuel in just a minute to click it and see if I can get a movie to show. But if it doesn't work, I wanted to go over these pictures. Back in the 70s, which was quite a while ago, and I think maybe one of the tests in England was done later, a series of crash tests were done with actual spent fuel casks. These tests weren't done to prove that the cask could survive a crash. They already knew they could. The tests were done to validate the models used to predict what would happen in a crash. And so these were benchmarking tests. They wanted to make sure that the models actually predicted real-world performance so that as they developed new casks, they could rely on the data that the model showed. The tests are impressive, though, and so I'm going to ask Manuel to go ahead and click it. The first one is actually a test in England, and the cask looks very different than the casks we use here, but bear with me. And Manuel, if you could click the link, and everybody keep your fingers crossed. Drum roll, please.
Only a full-scale rail crash would really prove the point. So, in July 1984, the CEGB organized Operation Smash Hit. The same flask as was used at Cheddar was fitted with a new lid, filled with a ton of water and 200 steel bars once again to simulate uranium fuel rods, festooned with measuring instruments and mounted on a British Rail flat roll, the kind of wagon used for transporting operational flasks. This was then derailed and turned on its side on a stretch of British Rail test track at Old Dalby in Leicestershire, as if it were a real accident. The train was set in motion without a driver. Eventually, it reached 100 miles an hour. It ploughed headlong into the derailed flask and wagon. The draw hook on the front of the locomotive hit the edge of the flask, but the lid stayed bolted in position. There was some scarring of the steel and buckling of the outside cooling fins. But the flask had been pressurized to 100 pounds per square inch before the test, and measurements taken afterwards showed that only 0.26 of 1 pound of pressure had been lost. Proof that it had remained intact and totally safe for the public had it contained actual radioactive materials.
The next test...
The first test, a truck carrying a 22-ton spent fuel cask impacted a 690-ton concrete block at 60 miles per hour. It was cleaned up and impacted a second time, but at 84 miles per hour. The cask also survived this more violent crash with only minor damage.
I'm hoping that Manuel can stop it. Good, thanks. The piece that he pulled off was an impact limiter. They put basically like crumple zones in a car. They put pieces on the ends of the cask to absorb the impact. That's a sacrificial piece. That was what was pulled off. This is the actual end of the cask. There's some deformation, but the bolts are all still in place. The steel isn't ruptured. The cask is intact. Go ahead and continue it, Manuel.
In the third test, a diesel locomotive crashed into a truck at 81 miles per hour. The stalled truck carried a 25-ton shipping cask.
They had to use rockets to get the locomotive accelerated to the speed on the short leg of the
Cask
track.
deformation was minimal, and the ability of the cask to contain and shield its radioactive contents was not compromised. The final impact test had a 74-ton shipping cask carried by a cask rail car crash into the concrete block at 81 miles per hour. This same cask and rail car were then positioned over a pool of jet fuel and subjected to an engulfing fire, much more severe than the fire that might occur in a train wreck. After 90 minutes, 3 times the duration of current qualification test criteria, surface temperatures exceeded 1400 degrees Fahrenheit, but inside the cask, where the spent fuel rods would be contained, temperatures were below 300 degrees, not enough to melt the spent fuel rods.
And again, these tests were done not to demonstrate the safety of the casks, but to validate the models used to design the casks. And the models were tweaked a little bit to reflect the actual real-world results. In the railcar test, they showed the train running into the brick wall and then the train locomotive running into a cask at over 80 miles an hour. And remember, the trains carrying this fuel are speed limited to 50 miles an hour. So the level of safety is, again, unparalleled in any of the hazardous material transportation in this country. Here's just a comparison, and I was cautioned to not say, don't worry about spent fuel, worried about chlorine. I don't want to pick on chlorine. Chlorine is a hazardous material, it's a gas, and it's a poison by inhalation. But it does have lots of beneficial uses. You need lots of chlorine to provide general health for water and other things in the country. So chlorine is an important industrial material as well as being a hazardous material. The wall thickness of the tanker car for shipping chlorine is less than 1 inch thick. The tip-over requirements for a chlorine tanker car for surviving is 9 miles an hour. So it's way less than what you have for spent fuel. A spent fuel cask, you've got 14 inches of material. This is a generic 150-ton cask. I can't show detailed descriptions of any of the vendors' casks because they're all proprietary designs. This is something from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but it's basically 14-inch thick wall. This 150-ton cask is used to ship roughly 12 tons, a little less than 12 tons of spent fuel. The chlorine tanker car, you've got, I believe, 70-some thousand pounds of rail car shipping 90 tons of chlorine, 180,000 pounds of chlorine. And so again, you've got economic reasons to want to be able to move lots of hazardous materials for other beneficial use. For spent fuel, the only concern is safety. It's not an efficient transportation system. It is a safe transportation system. And the last pillar of the safety is personnel training. All nuclear work is done under what they call a SQE structure. It's the safety conscious work environment. Everybody that does nuclear work is trained over and over again that raising concerns about the way work is done is part of your job. It's something that you have to pay attention to. If you feel that there's a safety concern, you are encouraged to raise it. That's part of the culture of working in the nuclear industry. And again, it's one of the few industries that actually openly encourages notification, raising concerns, raising issues. So that's a key pillar of partnering to do this. Other thing is that all spent fuel shipments are required to travel with a security escort, whether it's a rail car or a truck shipment. For trucks, they typically work with state police from the states they're traveling through. The state police cars travel with the truck. For rail cars, they actually have an escort car. It's a modernized, fancied up caboose, basically, that has communications equipment and a safe place for guards. But guards travel with the trains. And again, that's unique to hazardous material transportation. There's alcohol and drug testing for the crews that work on the trains or the drivers for the trucks that ship spent fuel. And as I mentioned earlier, for states that want to bring their emergency responders up to speed, there is this Transportation Emergency Preparedness Program that's run by the Department of Energy to provide some extensive training about what roles and responsibilities are and what skills are needed to deal with these shipments. And the last slide I believe I have is current status. You can't ship this fuel off of the power plant sites until you have a licensed place to ship it to. Right now there isn't one. There is work being done on 2 commercial sites for consolidating spent fuel storage, and that was mentioned by other speakers, one in southeast New Mexico and one in northwest Texas. There's also the potential for a repository being started up again. At some point, this fuel is going to be moved to another location, and it looks like we're getting closer to where that point might be. Special rail cars that meet the S2043 requirements have been designed. One of them has gone through the testing and qualification program. The other is expected to start its testing in early next year. Keep our fingers crossed for that. The casks that will be used to transport this equipment have been designed and they have been licensed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Hardware doesn't always exist in this country to actually do the shipments. There's about a 2 to 3 year lead time to buy the casks to get them fabricated, but the designs are there and they're approved. Approval of the routes. The railroads have their responsibilities. They update their data for safety and security on an annual basis. When you submit a request to ship from point A to point B, they have to find what routes meet that criteria, and then that route is then submitted to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for security approvals. Similarly, for truck shipments, there's an approval process for truck shipments, also approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. That can range for a new route 6 months to a year, depending on the complications, the length of the route, how remote the area that it's either being shipped from or to is, and what kind of access there is. Who will own the fuel when it leaves the power plant is another big stumbling block on shipping that has lots of ripple effects in terms of liability. The original expectation from all utilities was that the Department of Energy would pick up the fuel and take title to it when it picked it up and moved it to a repository location for ultimate disposal. If it winds up going to a private storage facility, roles and responsibilities for fuel ownership is something that has to be waded through, and what that means for liability has to be understood. The good thing is that SONGS is actively engaged in understanding all the aspects that are required to prepare the fuel from a nuclear engineering perspective, from a safety perspective, and from a transportation perspective, to be able to move it off-site when there's an opportunity to do so. And I believe, last conclusions, the safety record for these shipments is unparalleled in the hazardous material world. It's currently being shipped every year. Like I said, currently it's 10 to 20 shipments a year, and SONGS is in fact preparing itself to do this responsibly if and when an opportunity arises. And I think I had a slide for questions, but I believe you'll take care of that later.
Thank you very much. So first, Ted Quinn.
So I'd like to go back to slide 36 if we could.
He's got the reverse.
Good.
There it is.
Okay. I think from the public, I think this slide first could be turned into a schedule. Each item is related to a critical path that relates to the number one question from this audience and all of our audiences: when can the fuel move? And each of these, I'll take the first three. We'll take the first three. It's important to know a timeline, and I think your special committee can go address this, that address to the rail cars in this, not just the qualification, but then the procurement, and then the procurement by Edison. The potential of what is the earliest date, what's the potential, because it seems like there will be a significant number of, will we own the rail car? Will it be owned by the government and then just rented or loaned to do the actual shipments when they're ready? The same goes with the transportation casks. I'd like to understand for the 3 different vendor designs we have. And maybe these answers aren't something for today, but I would like to recommend to the chair that first you answer today, but that we look at this as a critical path timeline, because we need to answer this public of when we can move the fuel, and it's not just about when the site will be ready.
That's true. There are multiple options for procuring the hardware. When I was the transportation director for Yucca Mountain, I had a number of companies come to me and propose that in exchange for a sole source contract, giving them the funding to move all the spent fuel, they would buy all the hardware themselves and just operate on a contract to actually do the movements. That's an option that may be still out there.
There's these rail cars, and
Right.
thus they begin with the testing program, and then they buy what goes through the testing program in larger numbers, for which there's no appropriations right now. It would be helpful in this kind of critical path approach to understand if for some reason, say Congress is unable to agree on anything, not implausible, that the federal government can't do this, that then what is the time horizon over which a private company could procure, test, meet S2043, and then bring into service private rail cars? And would that be seen as legal under existing law? Because I think there's some ambiguity about the legality, but then most importantly, some questions about what the actual timing would be for that.
Sure.
So that we can understand what the real world time paths might be. Tom Palmisano? Oh, I'm sorry, Marnie, on this same theme?
Yes. I'm just concerned about.
Oh, we need your microphone there.
Oh, thank you.
Marnie Magda.
Morning, Magda. I'm just concerned on your slide 34, when you're giving us all of, the, how safe the shipment will be. The generic 150-ton cask for spent nuclear fuel transport does not look like it's the specifications of what we're used to seeing for Holtec with its canister in a cask. And I just
Right.
would like to understand how close this is.
Sure. Generically, they're very similar. What you see in this one, this is what would be called a bare fuel cask. Right now, Songs is loading all their spent fuel into canisters, and the canisters are going into dry storage. There's a basket arrangement in this transport cask that is actually in the canisters that Songs is currently loading. And so in a Songs configuration, what you would have is another 2 inches of steel inside this around that basket. And so it actually adds even more layers of protection, another layer.
Okay.
Most of the casks that are being designed now are being designed so that they could ship either bare fuel with this basket in the transport cask, or they can ship canisters by pulling the basket out of the transport cask and loading a canister in, where the canister has the basket inside it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Tom Palmisano?
Yeah, I have a couple comments. Okay, thank you. I have a couple comments, but just following up on that. We know the canister systems we're using, and we know the specifics of the 3 transportation casks, the 2 by Arriva and the 1 by Holtec. In a future meeting, I can bring in at least the non-proprietary information. The 2 other comments I want to make: Songs actually shipped 270 spent fuel assemblies in the late 70s and the early 1980s to a GE facility in Morris, Illinois. This again was back when spent fuel was going to be reprocessed. Now those were shipments done by truck, similar to the one picture you showed, but spent fuel has been shipped out of our specific facility, again by truck, to Morris, Illinois. The other thing you mentioned, the 12-axle rail car. We have actually used 12-axle rail cars on site, most recently in 2014. Some of you may remember I showed a picture of it actually. We shipped out the Unit 2 generator rotor that after the plant was closed we had sold. It's heavier than any of our spent fuel canister shipping casks, and it fits on our siding. So we are fortunate with our rail spur and our rail access, it can handle that long 12-axle rail car.
Excellent.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add those comments.
Thank you. Captain Mel Vernon?
Question that entered my mind is, are these canisters, these transportation canisters, are reusable?
Yes, the casks are reusable. The terminology, the canister is what Songs is loading and putting into storage. That canister goes inside, this is called a cask. And these casks have bolted lids, whereas the canisters that Songs is loading have welded closures. And so you put the canister inside the cask and bolt a lid on the cask, move the canister to where it's going to go, unbolt the lid, pull the canister out, bolt the lid back on, and move the transport cask to where you want to use it next. So it is reusable.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? I think it's been exceptionally helpful and informative, and I want to just thank you very much for spending an evening with us, telling us about why we should be worried about chlorine. I am still mystified as to how the British rail system is unable to get people safely to where they need to go, but seems to be able to deliver on spent nuclear fuels. But that's a question for another meeting and another group. Tom Palmisano, we had asked you to follow up on a handful of big questions and comments that were made at the last meeting in particular, and so why don't you have the floor to talk about that?
Okay, thank you very much. And again, Gary, I'd like to echo the thanks for supporting us, not only tonight, but on the expert team. Your experience or insights are going to be very valuable to helping to answer some of the questions we have, so thank you. So I'm going to follow up on a couple. I think we had 6 questions to follow up on. I'm going to keep this brief so we have adequate time for a break and public comment. These were the topics. So today I'm going to just touch briefly on these 6. Heat removal from canisters, show you our defense in depth slide, talk about radiation monitoring reporting, discharges via the ocean conduits. There was a question on the warranties for the canisters we're using, and then what we're doing on the extreme events workshop planning. And then, as David said earlier, in the future we'll come back to these topics and keep a running list of topics for a report back.
Can you say a couple words about, this is not the totality of the things raised at the last meeting, so you can just remind us all of what happens to all the questions that come up at these meetings?
Sure. We take all the questions, and if we don't discuss them in the meeting, or either way, try to write up an answer, post it on the website, and we've tried to improve the website so things are more readily available and easier to find the answers to. So we keep a running list of those questions and answers.
Yeah, and if people have feedback on the new website, that would be certainly
please.
helpful, because the old website was NRC worthy.
Thank you. Thank you. Our web design people are really excited about the new website, so we are looking for feedback. Again, we want to make it easy for you to find out information. Question about temperature monitoring and heat removal. We've talked before about these canister dry storage systems are passive. Basically, you need no electricity, you need no water flowing, etc. There's just this natural air circulation outside the canister. The spent fuel inside the welded steel canister is surrounded by helium. Heat dissipates through the helium in the canister walls, and air just circulates around just through a convection system. All of the dry cast systems basically work that way, and we have both horizontal and vertical. So the question came up, we do monitor outlet vent temperature. The current Arriva system, the 50 systems, has the permanent temperature monitors installed. The Holtec system will install the permanent monitors once we finish all 73. We check these as we load them and confirm they're working properly. The question, what is sufficient? So with these systems, basically once you know you've got the right temperatures, your inlet temperature and your outlet temperature, and you make sure the ventilation openings are free of obstructions, the system just works by convection and naturally. So across the domestic industry, you have 30 years of experience monitoring this. We specifically has 15 years experience. What prompted this question, would it make sense to put temperature monitors on the shell of the canister? We've looked at that, and that is not needed to understand if the system's working properly, really doesn't add any information, doesn't tell you anything about the fuel temperature inside. The key thing is the free flow of ventilation and monitoring the outlet temperatures, which we do. So that's the basic answer to that question. And it was kind of linked, could you detect a leak in a canister? We've talked before about the degradation mechanism of concern to be chloride stress corrosion cracking. Temperature isn't going to identify a tight through-wall microscopic crack, so it's not useful in that sense.
Right. We're going to talk in just a little bit about radiation monitoring,
right.
where I know a lot of people have
We're going to come to that topic. Yeah.
Ted Quinn?
While you're doing this, Tom, can you talk about the EPRI research that's occurring, and are any of the results similar to what we're doing here?
Well, EPRI's doing a lot of research. You're talking about
temperature monitoring and
well,
sensor positioning?
Yeah, I think what I'm familiar with, and I didn't come in prepared to talk about that in depth, but EPRI is involved in basically confirming the thermal analysis models that are used to design the canisters. What they have found and what the industry has found is we're pretty conservative. In other words, the canisters function more effectively for heat removal and the fuel's actually kept cooler than the models would predict. That's the research I'm familiar with.
Okay, just at future meetings, can we hear as the results are
Sure.
published? And
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, we'll capture that as an action to come in. Either I can come in or we can invite EPRI, who comes out periodically, to help talk about the work they're doing. Okay. Next one, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. We created this slide to continue to circle back through topics where we talk about defense in depth, you know, how these systems are designed, how they're fabricated. You heard a couple of the CE members talk about peening of the canisters that Holtec is doing on the new canisters. That was a direct result of public comment and CEP comment to make them more resistant to corrosion, chloride stress, corrosion, cracking. What we do from operations, maintenance, and security, future inspection activities, and future remediation. These are the dates where we have discussed these and will continue to discuss these. So that's what I like to show on this slide here.
Let me just say this was the result. I had the feeling that we had slides everywhere, and it was hard to know what the current state of play was. Right. And we've asked, this panel's asked Edison to keep coming back and layer in additional information and insight about
right.
what defense in depth really means in practice in plain English. And so thank you for putting this together and for keeping it evergreen.
Good, thank you. Radiation monitoring and reporting. Now, this is a very important topic, and there's been a lot of good dialogue with members of the public in terms of what is done currently to monitor the dry cast storage systems and songs, and what could be done and what could be publicly available. So first I want to tell you what we do currently. You've heard this before, but it's good to summarize it. Both our systems, the older system and the one that is now being filled, continuous security monitoring. 24/7, all weather conditions monitored visually and electronically. We do daily inspections of the facility, particularly the air vents, making sure the heat removal systems are working properly. We have 24/7 radiological monitoring, or the ISFC, that's currently as we are loading fuel and moving fuel into the facility. And I'll talk more about that. On a regular basis, we perform surveys throughout the fuel transfer process. Some of you have visited us on site. When we load fuel in the building into the canister and weld the canister, we then move it outside and put it in the facility. We monitor radiation levels through the whole process until it's placed into the facility, and then we monitor the facility. We do temperature monitoring, as I've just talked about. Bi-weekly, we survey the lids of each of the new loaded modules to make sure the radiation shielding is performing as expected. And I should mention, SONGS, because of the high seismic design, has a very heavily shielded system, more shielding than you would find elsewhere in the country on similar systems. The radiation levels at these systems are very, very low. They do a good job of shielding the radiation. We do regular quarterly radiation surveys. We have thermoluminescent dosimeters. These are basically the badges that measure the radiation exposure somebody may be exposed to. If you've been in a hospital situation, see a radiologist or radiological technician, they wear a little badge that measures the radiation they're exposed to. These are mounted all around the facility, and we read these monthly so we understand what's going on. And we do additional surveys as needed. Okay? Now, one thing on permanent systems, our original 50 does not have continuous online radiation monitoring. We've surveyed all the installations in the country, and virtually nobody has continuous online monitoring, quite frankly, because it hasn't found to be needed. We all do periodic surveys to confirm radiation levels. There's 2 plants in the country, and I happen to manage both of those plants in Minnesota, do have some sort of online radiation monitoring that are fed to the state of Minnesota, not publicly available. Those are the only 2 that really have that kind of a system. So basically, the way the systems work today, once you've got the system loaded, you inspect it, you confirm everything's operating properly, and you periodically measure radiation levels to make sure nothing's changed. Then should an event occur, let's go to the Midwest. Let's say a tornado goes through a power plant in the Midwest, or an earthquake occurred at the North Anna power plant in Virginia. Should an event occur like that, you then go immediately monitor to make sure nothing has changed and nothing is damaged. Because the way these systems are designed and built so robustly, absent something affecting it, the shielding doesn't change, the radiation levels don't change. So that's what's done currently. So there's been, and we do provide some reports, and we've commented about the NRC's usability of their website. These reports are not very user-friendly, okay? I covered these to some extent in one of the last meetings. We have an effluent report, meaning what we release either gaseously when we were operating or through liquid when we were operating, as well as now. Radiological environmental operating report. All the nuclear plants in the country, prior to operating and through operation and through decommissioning, have to sample around the environment to see are they depositing radioactivity from plant operation or decommissioning. We have done that for years. We have years worth of data. That's all publicly available. We continue to do that and will continue to do that. Those are not very easy to read. We do link them to the SONGS community website, but they're not written for a general audience. So I'm going to talk about that reporting in a minute. Well, let me talk about the reporting. So in the near term, we're going to take our standard NRC reports and we're going to simplify them and post them on our website so it is written not to dumb them down, but to make them a little more understandable of what we monitor, what we find, and what the results mean. So we've committed to do that. And then in the midterm, now let's go to radiation monitoring. It's been proposed that we consider 24/7 real-time radiation monitoring. And there's some fair amount of interest among some members of the public. We've looked at the SafeCast system. We're open to doing that, and we're actually researching how we might do that. Part of the rules we're under, we need a system that's calibrated, that the data can be relied upon. These affect to some extent come from NRC rules. So we're looking at what system we would put in that would meet the requirements that we're under. And also we need to talk, quite frankly, to the state and the counties in terms, you know, previously we've talked about the county's role in protecting the public. There are people we need to provide data to that is actionable. Okay. So we want to make sure we understand those stakeholders who have the formal legal responsibility to act to protect the public. What are their needs for accurate data, for timely data, and for data that's put in context? So we're busy doing all those things right now, starting with surveying what was done around the country. So in the midterm, near term, we'll clean up our reports and simplify them, but we are working, looking how we could use real-time data, what frequency of reports. The two plants in Minnesota, to give you an example, only one has actually their data reported to the public. It's reported by the state of Minnesota monthly. So you can look up the Prairie Island nuclear plant, you'll see the daily readings next to the ISFAC on a monthly report the state posts. And the state takes the responsibility to say this is accurate data that reflects the radiation levels. So that's partly why we need to talk to the state and talk to the counties in terms of what their needs are and their expectations are. And then we'll make our decisions in terms of what we are willing to do and work with the appropriate stakeholders in the public who are interested in this.
I am confident there's going to be some comments on this.
Sure.
Steve Schwartz first.
Yeah.
You don't. You just talk, and some miracle occurs.
All right.
Comes on.
Oh, another miracle occurs this time. Oh, this is the third meeting that I've been part of the group.
Right.
And the first meeting I was very encouraged when I heard conversation regarding real-time testing, reporting, and public access. Then I became a little discouraged because it wasn't even discussed the last meeting of any degree. And now I see near term and midterm, and none of those terms talk about what the public is asking for, and I know what the county of Orange is asking for, and that is a real-time 24/7 monitoring that the public has access to, so that we can see,
Please.
so that it's not like someone wants to look over your shoulder, but
Right.
they do. But it also it can take away or back off the level of anxiety that you have a lot of people living on both ends of San Onofre that are very much and should be concerned. So I don't want to hear that there's not being done anywhere else, or it's being done by one or two anywhere else. This is something that I believe our community and the representatives of our communities are demanding, that we find a way and we get it done, and we understand there are ways to do it. So I want this to be continued and get back to us on what is going to be done to do it, not that we're considering it or thinking about it.
No, and I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
Can I just pile on here? I have a petition here signed by 1,640 people on change.org, and people sign a lot of things for a lot of reasons, but this is a real expression of sentiment, exactly as Steve Schwartz has just outlined. And I would think it'd be really, really important to have a game plan, like a sense of what the timetable would be and when will we know the answers to the feasibility of different kinds of real-time monitoring programs. It's going to be quite a while between now and our next regular meeting. We will have a meeting on extreme events this fall. Planning for that's underway. You'll talk about that in a little bit. But we certainly don't want to come back in the first quarter of 2019 and find out that we're in the same spot that we are right now.
And that's a fair request and a fair statement, and I appreciate it. I would be happy in the next meeting to bring in a game plan and timeline. Okay.
Yeah, I think even I know you guys have a lot of things going on, but I think even an update long before then, back to the community panel saying, you know, we've heard this, or there's going to be public comment about this. This is an important issue about the relationship between the communities and the plant, and here's what we're doing, so that we already have a sense well before the next meeting. I think that would be a reason.
We'll be glad to provide that report. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Why don't you move on?
Okay, thank you. Discharges. So there's been a lot of discussion about liquid releases. So I wanted to kind of recap a little bit. You know, the nuclear plant has been there for a number of years and has discharged regularly and been properly done in accordance with permits for a number of years. Discharges are regulated in a couple different ways. Starts with the Federal Clean Water Act. The NRC is the agency that regulates radioactive discharges. At the State Water Board, and locally the San Diego region, the California Regional Water Control Board regulate non-radiological discharges. So all wastewater that we discharge, and I should mention, when the plant was operating, we regularly drew cooling water in from the ocean, circulated it through the plant, and discharged it. Okay? We still do that today. We take water in continuously and discharge it. We only take in about 2% of what we did during operation, because most of the water during operation was used to cool the turbine generators, and they are obviously no longer in service. So all the water we discharge is monitored for radioactivity to ensure compliance with NRC limits and the EPA limits. The trace radioactivity we discharge today is about 1% of what we discharge during operation. To give you a feel, when we look at what we discharge, an average member of the public or hypothetical member of the public would get 0.003 millirem per year. That's 100,000 times what we get as individuals just living. From solar radiation, natural radiation sources, the sand gives off radiation. So our contribution to background radiation is very low. So let me go back.
Before, Dan, you have...
Tom, at the last meeting, there was a question about the schedule of when the discharges are, and would Southern California Edison be willing to publicize when those discharges are?
And we, at this point, we need to talk to the San Diego Regional Water Quality Board. We're going to discharge in accordance with our NPDES permit and the NRC permits. We discharge continuously.
Okay.
So we're discharging as we speak. So there's not a lot that makes sense in terms of notifying you when we discharge. Now, we'll look at the future decommissioning activities to see if there's a major discharge planned. I think that's more of interest to people.
And also, can you somewhat quantify the amount of volume that's going out?
I've got the numbers in my notes. I believe during operation we took in and discharged about 2.5 billion gallons a day. Now we're permitted to about 56 million gallons a day, and we only discharge about half of that, about 35 million gallons per day.
So 35 million gallons a day?
Circulates through the plant. This is water that's taken in, used to cool things, and pumped back out.
Got it.
Added to that, we have a sewage treatment plant that discharges. We've got sumps, you know, that collect water that discharges through that. Very little radioactivity since we're not operating. All that is included in the discharge. But the plant circulates water continuously through the plant at this point. Much, 2% or less of what it did operationally. Okay.
The only thing that's being cooled in the plant is the spent fuel pool, right?
Spent fuel pool, some air conditioning systems for the control room and things like that.
But
yeah.
When, at the end of next year, you will be done with the fuel offloading campaign, so then does the spent fuel recirculation stop?
Actually, spent fuel, we put in spent fuel pool cooling islands a couple years ago. They are no longer cooled by ocean water, they're cooled by air. So we have chiller systems, so I should modify that. The spent fuel pool cooling systems are no longer cooled by ocean water. These are some of the air conditioning systems in the various buildings, things like that. Now, when we're done with, so when we finish the spent fuel offload, we'll turn off the cooling islands for the spent fuel pools. We will still have a discharge because we have a sewage treatment plant, for example, like many municipalities do, that discharges.
And so why is there any radiological content to the discharge?
Just trace radiological content, you know, tritium evaporates off the spent fuel pools. So while the spent fuel pools are in service, it's a trace amount, it evaporates, it condenses in some of the sumps, trace amount of radioactivity is discharged.
Okay, and the half-life of tritium is relatively short, so presumably
It's
that drops
relatively
very,
short.
very
It's a
quickly.
fairly benign radioactive isotope in that sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Okay, Tom, go ahead.
Okay, ISFC warranty has been a lot of discussion. Let me start at the bottom. The current system that's been in service since 2003, the Arriva New Home system, canisters were fabricated in the early 2000s, has a 2-year warranty. Okay. The new system, which has been fabricated, has actually a 30-year warranty. Much different system, built to later standards, different materials, and different treatment of materials. Included, we got a 5-year extension because we elected to peen the canisters to make them more resistant to cracking. So that warranty will begin in 2019 when all the canisters are loaded and extends for 30 years. So that's the picture on the warranties. That was that specific question. And those were the follow-up items I wanted to report on today. Questions?
I guess I want to make the point that many people have made time and time again, that there's a difference between a warranty and the expected lifetime.
Right, yeah.
Just like I've learned there's a difference between the warranty on my Honda Civic and its expected lifetime, because the car never seems to stop. Okay. Any other comments? Great. So
Okay,
we're going to
thank
take a, thank you very much, Tom. That was very helpful. I think, you know, with the limits of time, we should do this more regularly, where we actually look explicitly back at the previous meeting at some big questions that come up repeatedly and talk about them more actively, because the back and forth from that, I think, is very, very important. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to have the public comment period. So we're now in break. Let's get started. Okay, we're going to get started here. I have been handed an announcement, and it is not that I won the lottery. It is that apparently some folks are parking in the adjacent lot at Kingdon Hall, and Kingdon Hall is having some kind of event tonight, and so I guess they're going to tow your car or crush it or something like that. Apparently don't park at Kingdon Hall because there's a credible towaway risk. You may want to move your car and park it in Albertsons, I was told. I'm not quite sure why Albertsons is thrilled about that, but in any case, park it in Albertsons if you're in Kingdon Hall right now, and then buy a pack of gum when on your way out at Albertsons. But please don't park in Kingdon Hall because apparently they're quite serious about... Just right in front of here, yeah, if you're in a legal parking space, that's fine. Okay, this is a parking space. If it's a parking space associated with this complex and it doesn't say don't park here, then I think you're fine. But you don't want to be next door in Kingdon Hall. Any other announcements about parking? Okay, so public comment period now. A lot of folks have signed up, but I am confident we will get through our list tonight. First on the list is Gene Stone and then Charles Langley. And can you please spell... I mean, if you have a last name like Victor, where everybody knows how to spell Victor, then you don't have to spell it out. But can you please spell your last name when you make your comment before the clock begins so that our court reporter has the benefit of getting your accurate spelling?
Gene Stone, S-T-O-N-E. Is the clock on? Oh. First of all, I'd like to say that I put some petitions signatures on your table tonight. We had over 1,649 people sign our petition for real-time independent radiation monitoring, free and open to the public. So I wanted to thank everybody for signing that petition. I also wanted to thank Tom. I think we've been negotiating and talking about this real-time radiation monitoring, so I see that his suggestions tonight is a great first step. I'd like to volunteer to be on any sort of committee in between time to discuss that. Thank you for taking steps, and I'd like to help push you over the edge here. So, and not the cliff, just the edge. And the other thing I'd like to announce is our first petition was so successful that we have initiated another petition to the governor and the state legislators to produce a law to mandate real-time independent radiation monitoring with free access to the public. So I hope to get a lot of support for that as well. I'd like to make an appointment with you, Tom, out at Songs again, and I'd like to invite David Victor to come along with Darren and I with our Begeiges and go out and get a reading at each and every event that's available at this point. You have 29 plus the 50. So I hope we can do that before the next meeting. Was that a yes?
Let's make the comments and we'll make...
Thank you so much.
It sounds like yes is the answer, but...
So I would like to spend the rest of my time talking about the heat. There is a purpose. The reason why you guys monitor is because there's an NRC regulation about it can only go, I think, 85 degrees above normal temperature. So it is an early warning factor, not about a leak, but that might be something heating up inside those canisters. And I believe that is the reason for monitoring it and how important it is. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gene Stone. Next is Charles Langley and then Madge Torres. Charles Langley, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm Charles Langley. And I enjoyed the videos on cans with the rockets shooting cans into walls and things. But there's a difference between an empty can and a full can. And You know, one of the can examples was in Britain with 2 tons of water and steel bars in it. The average weight of one of these canisters, I believe, is going to be 38,000 pounds. And I believe the cans are rated for up to 110,000 pounds. So there's a real difference between me dropping this empty can of ginger ale on the floor and dropping one that's full and one that's hot and full. We just did a analysis on our website using proportional mathematics, and what it shows is that if you take the thickness of one of these Holtec cans, it's about as thick as an egg, but it would be an extremely heavy egg. So it's not really like we're just dropping a soda can or shooting it on a rocket into a wall. This is really heavy, heavy stuff. I also wanted to reiterate the request for real-time radiation monitoring. This is a BGeiger Nano, and they're coming out with a new generation of Geiger counters that can be solar powered and actually automatically upload radiation in real time. We've got a prototype that we've worked with SolarCast, and you can go to the Public Watchdog's website and get real-time radiation readings 1 mile away from San Onofre. And finally, I'd like a little bit of clarity on why one would be measuring heat levels coming out of one of these containers to check for radiation. It seems the way you'd check for a radiation leak would be with a Geiger counter. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Next is Madge.
Oh, I had one more thing, Dr. Victor. I do apologize. In the newspaper today, it was announced that the Porter Ranch blowout, they're actually, as a way of ameliorating that, they're putting in equipment to test for gas leaks. So there's precedent for that. $3 million to fund that. These things cost a couple $1,000 a piece, max. This is very cheap stuff. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Next is Madge Torres and then Ray Lutz.
Okay, I'm Madge Torres, Torres. I'm with Citizens Oversight. I'd like to reiterate my support for real-time independent monitoring, and I think independent is key because there's a lot of chicanery that goes on and doesn't get caught, and there's stuff that does get caught and doesn't get prosecuted among the people that are in charge of the regulations, the regulators of our safety. So although it isn't a good idea for Southern California Edison to put profit above people, that's the way capitalism works. But you, those of you that are representing the public and also the regulators, you're supposed to be representing me because I'm the taxpayer, I'm the one that lives here. So I'd like to ask that you do your job and not only support independent monitoring 24 hours a day, every day. I'd like you also to get the radiation, the cause of the radiation, the canisters, get them off the beach, even if you're just taking them to the bluff or the mesa across the road. And also, I'd like to support the Helms proposal, because once the canisters get to an area where they can be monitored, the Helms proposal has a mechanism for doing that, and it's pretty simple. It's just physics. It's not like computer science. I remember when I was in continuation class in high school, we used to have to watch car crash movies. I guess they thought that was the level of mentality among the people that were placed in continuation. But that's kind of what we were watching today, car crash movies. And the thing is that when I come here, I listen to these solutions that are just silly. Like, yeah, we're going to have little bugs crawling up and down the canisters, little mechanical robots that can find the radiation. And that's silly. I mean, and Helms has something just by a change of pressure that would indicate if there were a leak. And those little mechanical insects don't even exist. Just like a way to take the rods out of the defective casts doesn't exist.
Thank you very much for your comment. Next is Ray Lutz and then Scott Reinhardt. Ray Lutz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ray Lutz, LUTZ Citizens Oversight. I basically have two comments tonight. First of all, we talked about defense in depth, and it's very strange how this is looked at. They have things like planning, probably enough money, lots of meetings. Has nothing to do with can we actually recover from a problem. Now, we learned that we're about to transfer all the waste into these canisters and then destroy the fuel pools, which was for a long time told to us as the way to deal with a cracked canister. Oh, we'll just put it back into the pool. Now we learned that that's not even really a good idea. But maybe it would be a better idea than just letting a cracked canister just spew the stuff out into the environment if something bad actually did happen. So we need a plan of action, defined plan of action, not just maybe we can figure something out, for what to do with a cracked and leaking canister if you destroy those fuel pools. Now, in Maine Yankee, they had an additional failed canister overpack that they could put it into and seal it up. It's not a new idea. There's other plants have said, yeah, we realize this is a danger and we have to have a way to deal with it. So you guys should have a plan. Please do that. Next, we need a fallback plan in case all of this other stuff doesn't work out. Congress may not pass it. New Mexico, everybody revolts, and maybe despite all the transportation glory that we saw, there's no way that we can transport it because people are lying down on the tracks. And it may not be able to be transported like that. Even if technically it could, it may not be possible. And we can't leave it 100 feet from the ocean. So I ask that Camp Pendleton, with all due respect, the mission of the military is not training. The mission of the military is to protect the nation, to protect the public. Protection. And we need protection from this fuel. And so I ask for this body here, despite you can't do anything very much, but the leaders at least, and especially the Camp Pendleton representative, to reach higher up into the organization of Camp Pendleton, bring people in here that are not just the representative that's on the panel, but people who may be able to pull some strings. Either put it up on that mesa or further back. I vote for about 3 miles in and about 1,500 feet up. I don't even want it next to the freeway and the rail line. That's not far enough in. But there should be an option to move that fuel under the freeway and into Camp Pendleton in a safe place. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment, Ray Lutz. Next is Scott Reinhardt and then Nina Babiars.
It's not me. I'm just putting on the mic here.
So we do not have Scott Reinhardt? Okay. Nana Babiars, and then Sarah Brady.
Thanks, Rich. Well, good evening. My name's Nina Babiars, and I'd very first like to thank Steve Schwartz.
B-A-B-I-A-R-Z.
Correct. I'd like to thank Mr. Schwartz for raising the question that he did earlier. And Dr. Victor, I'd like to thank you for reinforcing the 1,600 and whatever people that signed that petition, because people were very passionate about this issue of independent radiation monitoring. But I have a few questions tonight. By Edison calculations, there were 4 cans in the ground when there was a bolt/shim problem discovered with the 5th can. The NRC then allowed the burial to resume with 30 cans that did not have the quote-unquote improved manufacturing process. I'm calculating that there were, what, 4 or 5 cans, Tom? Okay, plus 30, so we've got 34, 35 cans that are going to go in the ground, and you're saying that you've got 29 buried, according to your calculations a few minutes ago. So I'm looking at basic math, 6 more cans that don't have the improved manufacturing process that are going in the ground. So I want to know, and this is a question I'd like follow-up on, what type of cans will Edison be using after those 5 or 6 cans are going to be buried? And my other question is, will those next 5 or 6 cans have the quote-unquote improved manufacturing process or not? Question. I have another question. Who determined what the improved manufacturing process was and why it was needed in the first place? What defect or deficiency was identified that required it? And if it was needed and necessary, why is Edison allowed to now bury cans without the improved manufacturing process? And I would like answers to all those questions. Question number 2, category number 2 of question that I have, is what's the progress with that underground monitoring system that you don't have? The reason that public watchdogs and many others believe this issue of independent radiation monitoring is so urgent is, number 1, there's no underground monitoring. There should have been independent radiation monitoring before 1 can ever went into the ground on January 30th. And there's other reasons as well that I'll squeeze in my last few seconds. And that was that Edison was deceptive when they said they were going to put like-for-like replacement generators. That they didn't. And what they did was a new technology that gave us a radiation leak. And that information they withheld from the public for 17 days. So Edison cannot be trusted, and we need some answers to these questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next is Sarah Brady and then Christine Gorman.
Hello, my name is Sarah Brady, S-A-R-A-H-B-R-A-D-Y. I'm a resident of Encinitas, California, and I was raised there. I want to comment on some of the presentation tonight, which a lot of it consisted of information on transportation of spent fuel from San Onofre, for which there's a not clear path forward, any way of where it would go. I have a question to start off. What are the specific rail and truck routes that San Onofre's waste would go through and be transported on? Would they go through San Diego or Orange County and Los Angeles? Gary Lantham, on slide 26 today, you stated that 4,336 casks of spent nuclear fuel were shipped from power plants and research reactors between 1964 and 2010. Only 1,600 of those are high burnup fuel that has come from nuclear power plants, so that number is very misleading. Because the majority of those transports were from research reactors, which produce lower level radioactive waste. The document that you cited shows on the same slide, the document you cited on slide 26, shows that so far 821 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel has been shipped from power reactors thus far. There's a total of 79,000 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel from reactors in the US. Doing some basic division, 821 metric tons divided by 79,000 metric tons equals 1% of the total spent nuclear fuel in the United States is the amount that, with your numbers, if they are correct, has been shipped thus far. So even if your data is correct, the amount of shipments that need to happen in the future for the commercial nuclear fuel across our country is 100 times greater than the shipments of power plant spent nuclear fuel that has happened since 1964. On slide 28, you state the accident fatality risk associated with spent nuclear fuel shipments is more than 3 orders of magnitude less than for some other common hazardous materials. But I would argue that because only 1% of the spent nuclear fuel that needs to be shipped has been, and that is the data that statistic is coming from, that is not a fair statistic. Just because something bad hasn't happened in the future doesn't mean that something bad won't happen, or something bad hasn't happened already doesn't mean that something bad won't happen in the future. The day before Chernobyl happened, no accident like Chernobyl had happened. The day before 3 Mile Island happened, no accident like 3 Mile had happened. And this day before Fukushima happened, no accident like Fukushima had happened. The videos you cited are from the 90s, and they use casks that are not the same as the casks we use today. And as noted before, those were empty, not full of nuclear fuel, so I don't believe that those are an accurate source to cite.
Okay, thank you very much for your comment. Christine Gorman and then Darrell Gale.
My name is Christine Gorman, Chrisistine. Gorman. Many of us were very concerned when we heard that you are just working on how you can implement the plan, and maybe you won't even do it, for getting real-time monitoring. I would specifically like to ask that you post a progress report at a minimum monthly about what steps you're taking, about where there's any delays. Are you trying to contact some other agency and that's where there's a delay or hang up? If you could please post that on your website frequently, because it's just too long between meetings for us to wait and come back and maybe hear again that you're working on it. So I think that would be important and probably very easy to do. Even if you're not doing anything, post back in 3 or 4 weeks and say, well, I haven't done anything. And then the other issue is on the water that's being discharged. You say it's ongoing. And the part that's a little bit too vague is, I guess there's radioactive water mixed with other types of water and so on. And then you mentioned 35 million gallons. But I would like to have something much more specific than that. How much of radioactive and similar type materials are in that water? And if you're saying that that's regulated both by the NRC and the EPA, you have numbers. Please post those numbers on your website for us to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next is Darrell Gale and then Ramesh Jain. Darrell Gale, the floor is yours.
Darrell Gale, Gale. I want to tell you the story of SoCalGas in the Aliso Canyon blowout, and it is completely pertinent to what we are dealing with here. Aliso Canyon was an oil field in extreme rural northwest Los Angeles County. After all the easy-to-get oil was depleted, SoCalGas acquired the property, and then greedy, unscrupulous developers started building multi-million-dollar homes right out there, directly across the street from where the SoCalGas facility was turning it into a giant CH4 methane storage facility. Thousands of people bought beautiful, expensive homes, never being told they were mere feet away from a giant mountain underground gas storage. Many of the old oil wells were improperly capped and cased. In fact, we didn't even know how to case wells properly in the 30s and 40s. Some of them were cased in leather. And because SoCalGas didn't monitor their own property or put safety valves on the ancient oil wells, and our state of California agency, DOGGR, that's DOGGR, Department of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources, never, ever inspected this large facility, in October of 2015, one of the 62-year-old wells blew out, sickening thousands of people, forcing them to evacuate. It spewed 100,000 tons of methane into our atmosphere and wasn't capped till February 2016, 5 months later. Because of SoCalGas's arrogance and lack of foresight, no protective equipment was available anywhere in California. Emergency shutoff equipment was borrowed from Texas, and it didn't work. Today, people still suffer from low-level chronic leaking methane, nonstop nausea, vomiting, headaches, lots of dead pets, and daily nosebleeds. 6 teachers of the school right there on the property, it's called Porter Ranch, have gotten cancer, and 2 have already died. Jerry Brown refuses to shut the facility down. We have gone up there, we have marched, we have lobbied, we have beseeched him, but he won't shut it down because his sister Catherine is on the board of Sempra Energy. So I'm just asking everybody in front and behind to stay vigilant and make sure you question authority. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Next is Ramesh Jain, and then Tom Amabile.
Well, my name is Ramesh Jain, R-A-M-E-S-H. Last name is Jain, J-A-I-N. And briefly, I have, my profession was nuclear engineering, and I have worked almost 33 years on various plants, building nuclear systems, servicing, and maintenance and refurbishment, just like which was done on San Onofre. That was my last specialty, replacing steam generators. And I'm surprised. Let me just share just little other sentiments here. If before Fukushima, somebody asked me, what do you think of nuclear power? I say it's a great way to generate electricity. We are dedicated people there. And one thing we have been taught all the time, that public safety comes first. Whatever you do there, keep in mind public safety comes first. And I live with those standards and still do. DOE, there is a gentleman from DOE, promised 1998 facility will be there, all these waste material will go there. We are talking 20 years after. So reason I'm bringing this fact, we are talking the details of something. We are not going to the grassroots level, what has not been done, and why we do not bring those people here who promise those things, higher level people who has the money. Come back on songs. Tremendous mistakes. 250 million or more replacing steam generators, reactor vessel head, all intelligent people are involved. Professionals are involved. Big mistake, removing anti-vibration system or simplifying it. Plants closed down. Now come back to these canisters. And I heard 30 years of life and all these things. Plant life is 40 years, canister life is only 30 years. And this little chart here shows 35 years of dry canister lying somewhere. Nuclear power plants, the way I understand, were never designed permanently or long-term storage, knowing the fact they were designed to keep the spent fuel temporarily and then ship it. Now, as we cannot forward further, we have no notion neither from Department of Energy nor these new facilities in Texas, and we are start talking how to monitor this. We are getting those details, which has practically no meaning to me. We have to go to root cause. And please give me one more minute just to hit this
Not
point.
a minute, but a couple seconds if you want.
Okay, a couple of seconds. Question. If these canisters here, the facility is not designed to store these canisters, what program, what design you have in your hand, if earthquake comes and tsunami comes or they come together, what you have done, how you are going to handle this question, not of shipping the waste lying there for 35 years.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your
Thank
comments.
you so much for listening me, and thanks for the public. But please, public safety come first.
Thank you very much for your comment. Next is Tom Amabile. Tom, you're going to have to help us with the pronunciation of your name. I'm going to the Italian. And then after that is Danica Carson.
Actually, for Italian, it is, but I pronounce it Amabile because my dad did that. And it's Amabile. Just wanted to thank Southern California Edison for their continued support of offsite emergency management. I just retired from the County of San Diego as one of their emergency services coordinators, and I was one of the ones who did planning for San Onofre. And I just wanted to thank Edison for the support they always gave us, and just to express my hope that they continue to do so in the future.
Wow. Okay, thank you. Danica Carson and then Isla Breezy. Danica Carson, the floor is yours.
My name is Danica Carson. First name spelled D as in Delta, A-N-I-K-A. Last name Carson, C-A-R-S-O-N. I was born and raised in San Diego, California. I'm a public watchdogs advocate. I am in complete disbelief that an approved site that was obtained illegally is still being used. It is completely mind-blowing. And to put the icing on the cake, you guys call it a burial site, which is completely misleading. It's really a dump. I understand that there are tons of concerns that impact our future, but I'm currently focusing on the present. Let's face it, Edison has no plan of moving the dump site anytime soon. In that case, things will remain the same, and I have major concerns. Are emergency personnel such as firefighters, police officers, paramedics, and possibly even the military at all prepared for a nuclear emergency? Do they know what to do, how to do it? Better yet, are they even informed about the state of our nuclear waste here in Southern California? Is there an evacuation plan in place? What does our emergency procedures consist of? Without a plan, we are all just sitting ducks. I feel the issue is extremely important because we have no control over Mother Nature, and we are clearly every bit of unprepared for such an unnatural disaster. There isn't any media coverage, any pamphlets, any notices. There is nothing available to the public to keep us informed. People are moving here and purchasing property without the knowledge of the fact that there is nuclear dump that is using thin, defective canisters. The canisters are entirely unsafe. As a matter of fact, they are extremely unsafe with no monitoring. After Southern California Edison's reputation was ruined, there should have been major changes made. One of the most important is that Edison should not be allowed to monitor the radiation leaks. They've clearly been proven to be untrustworthy, so having Edison in charge of the monitoring does not make any sense, being that the public would not be alerted of a radiation leak until hours or even days after the fact. With the 3.6 million pounds being stored, it is outright deadly for the 8.5 million lives within just a 50-mile radius of the dump. Seems as though Edison does not mind killing off a portion of the population here in Southern California. I'm on the verge of believing that that may be part of the plan. No one from Edison is working hard enough or fast enough for a rightful solution. The public has a right to know. It is not that we want real-time monitoring, but we absolutely need it. We've had our lives in the hands of Edison for far too long. We have the right to be informed and remain informed at any time we choose. A lot of us here today have attended several meetings, and yet there have been no useful answers to any of our questions. We need answers, and we need them now.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. There was something you said in your comments that I need to clarify by email. Maybe you could just send me a copy of your comments, since I saw that you were reading from them, and we can coordinate by email on that. Ayla Breezy, please, and then David Fritsch.
Hi, it's Isla, A-Y-L-A, that's okay, Breezy, B-R-E-E-Z-Y. Good evening. So thank you for this meeting in Oceanside. It keeps moving farther south, and we appreciate you making it easier for people from San Diego. And thank you for the follow-up topics in the slide presentation. It's nice when our concerns are heard and attempted to be alleviated. So I'm wondering if Holtec has offered to buy Edison's nuclear waste. And here are some transportation issues that I see. I've heard that routes through LA have been told what will happen. And I agree that the weight of the cans are so heavy that I don't think that the DOE has had experience transporting cans that are filled with so much spent nuclear fuel rods. Shipping nuclear waste across the country is extremely dangerous. We must avoid doing it twice. We all had a very busy week with the California State Lands Commission's hearings this week. It was a lot for all of us to mobilize and attend and speak up. I found a lot of flaws in the draft EIR, and I pray that it does not go into approval by the California Coastal Commission. I know the panel holds an opposite opinion. I think it's going to be an extremely hazardous demolition which endangers our clean air, earth, and water, no matter the attempt to keep it contained. So regarding the petition on change.org, we reached 1,600 signatures and 135 comments. We appreciate you listening to us at the last meeting about real-time radiation, and you included slides. I appreciate you being open to the continuous monitoring and looking at possible systems and talking to counties for what their needs are. Thank you, Steve Schwartz, for talking about the County of Orange and expressing people's anxieties and how this will help to alleviate it. And for Chairman Victor, I appreciate you sharing the information about the petition and asking for a timeline and update well before the next meeting. So I'd just appreciate you following up on that. We believe that this will help to ease the hearts and the minds of many people. And on another note, I feel that taking away the monitoring outside of the air vents is extremely dangerous. That's where we need to be monitoring. So we're all stuck in the same situation together. We don't want the waste here. We're in a stalemate with the government and legislation. The consolidated interim storage sites may or may not manifest. Because of this, I strongly believe in the option to move the waste to the Mesa. I spoke criticizing the draft EIR report for leaving this option out. I think it's a viable alternative that needs to be further looked into. Former NRC Chairman Greg Zacco, I think I'm going to say that wrong, and Tom English, nuclear engineer, agree on the latest KPBS report. So I'm going to butcher your name, but from Camp Pendleton, Tom Glockland spoke out against the idea, but I think that with the rising sea levels at the coast, it should warn us that we should need to move it farther back before it's too late. So I know the idea of decommissioning the IFCC is a projected date of 2051. I don't know where it will be in 33 years, but I hope I see it moved in my lifetime.
Thank you very much. Next is David Fritsch and then Nancy Sublet. David Fritsch, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is David Fritsch. I'm a worker on the ISFC project. I work on the spent fuel. I work as a FRITCH. I do industrial safety, so OSHA stuff, not nuclear stuff, but I'm out there. I may not have a job tomorrow after what I'm about to say, but that's fine, because I made a promise to my daughter that if no one else talked about what happened on Friday, that I would. About 12:30 on August 3rd, we were downloading, and the canister didn't download, but the rigging came all the way down. It was gross errors on the part of two individuals. There were gross errors on the part of two individuals, the operator and the rigger, that are inexplicable. So what we have is a canister that could have fallen 18 feet. That's a bad day. That happened. And you haven't heard about it. That's not right. My friend here is right. Public safety should be first. And I've been around nuclear for many years. It's not. Behind that gate, it's not. Here's a few things that I've observed in the 3 months I've been here. SQE, the safety conscious work environment, where people are constantly given encouragement to raise concerns. It's not repeatedly, or even, I've never even received SQE training since I've been on site. That's not standard for a nuclear site. Operational experience is not shared. That problem had occurred before, but it wasn't shared with the crew that was working. We're undermanned. We don't have the proper personnel to get things done safely, and certainly undertrained. Many of the experienced supervisors, what we call CLSs, cast load supervisors, once they understand the project and how everything works, are often sent away, and we get new ones. They don't understand as well as even the craft basic construction craft, a lot of them that haven't been around nuclear before, are performing these tasks. Not technicians, not highly trained, not thorough briefs. This is an engineering problem. What happened is inside of that cask, there is a guide ring at 4 feet down, and it's to guide that canister down correctly to be centered in this system. Well, it actually caught that. And from what I understand, it was hanging by about 1/4 inch.
Thank you very much for your...
So...
Yeah, I'm not trying to cut him off, Ray. He stopped at the end of the time, and so I thanked him for his comment.
Sure. I just have
if you want to very briefly finish.
Yes, yeah. And I think, I mean, obviously the point is clear. As people said, Edison's not forthright about what's going on. I'm sure they'll tell you that they were going to bring this out once it was analyzed, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure they've been preparing what they would answer if it comes out. And I came here tonight to see if this event would be shared with the community, and I was disappointed to see that it was not. And I want to thank the community of San Clemente. It's a beautiful, wonderful community with amazing people. You've been great to me. My family's here with me for the month. And unless Edison and Holtec commit to defining success on this project as safety, and I'm not talking about any of the concerns that were voiced today. I'm just talking about downloading, getting the fuel out of the building safely. And are we going to address what would have happened to that canister if it would have fallen, even if the shell wasn't penetrated? Now will they take it in a repository site? But the question is, will Edison and Holtec commit to defining success primarily in terms of nuclear safety? And will there be transparency, commitment to safety, and the financial commitment to make sure that it's done successfully? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Nancy Sublette and then Donna Gilmore. Okay, thank you. Donna Gilmore and then Gary Hedrick. Donna Gilmore, the floor is yours.
We have the same question every time. What are you going to do with a leaky canister? The only options are put it in the pool. We now know these canisters are being loaded so damn hot, you can't do that. The only other option, as you told me on a sign conversation, Tom, is a hot cell. You don't have any plans to do that. The other option you talked about offline and that you said is some kind of an overpack cast. There's no thermal analysis done for that. No one has approached the NRC to do that. We've got 15-year-old canisters here. The only plan that I know you're actually doing is you've asked Areva, your vendor, to no longer have to report the radiation levels coming out of the outlet air vents. The only possible reason to not share those levels is to hide them. So instead of getting public radiation monitoring, you're going behind and getting the NRC to approve stopping measuring those radiation levels. If there's leaks in the canister, they will go out those outlet air vents. I did some research. The Edison NRC has already approved this for Calvert Cliffs. Their canisters are 25 years old. So the real plan, guys, everybody, the real plan is to hide the leaks. Southern California Edison is the company that ran the first commercial reactor in the country, Santa Susana. They brag about that. What they don't tell you is that reactor leaked into the community in Simi Valley. They hid the leaks for 20 years. A student doing research at UCLA found the documents. So they have a history of hiding leaks. The 17-day was hidden. They told us it didn't release to the public. So they have absolutely no intention to do anything. They know these canisters can leak, and what do? They buy more of them. These were not designed to last. Forget talking about transport. I want to know what you're going to do when those canisters start leaking, and we have no answers. The only option is to buy thick wall casks. Take that trust fund money, take that $4.3 billion, and do it right. Get the thick cast so we can sleep at night, so we can live in Southern California. You know, the people in New Mexico, they don't want this stuff, but they're going to get it anyway, because when these canisters start leaking and exploding, stuff is going to go airborne and head inland. It's going to go everywhere. Each one of these cans is roughly a Chernobyl nuclear disaster, and they can explode. These are pressure vessels, and there are no pressure monitoring on them. There's no pressure relief valve. The 3 Mile Island cans had that. So you don't even have that on these containers. When you're loading, you know the pressure when you put the helium in. But after that, there's no monitoring at all for pressure. The NRC gives exemptions from mechanical standards. So I have a handout if anybody didn't get it. But it's time to talk about anything else until they answer this question.
Thank you very much for your comments, Donna Gilmore. Next is Gary Hedrick and then Torgen Johnson. Gary Hedrick, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Gary Hedrick, Headrick, with San Clemente Green. And I'm just emotionally touched and honored to be here with someone who was bold enough to speak the truth to power. I appreciate that so much, and that's what got me involved. I think we all heard that story before, but I just can't tell you how important it is to have people like that, and how important it is for us to listen to them. Ah, man, it just brings back memories of whistleblowers, or heroes in my mind, that told me about things that we would never have heard of before. There's an incident where on a Thanksgiving day, I think it was 2011, steel I-beam dropped into the spent fuel pool, and could have, if it had gone straight down, it could have damaged the fuel, and instead it just glanced off, and they went in with hazmats and protective measures. It was a close call, and no one would have ever heard of it. And here, you know, this is not what I intended to speak about, but accidents do happen. We have to listen to people that are trustworthy, that really have the public's interest in mind. And Gregory Yasko, the former NRC chairman, who was in charge during the Fukushima accident, he had a life-changing event to understand that there's another side to this story that he had to come to grips with. And he told us just last week on KPBS that the spent fuel pool, the spent nuclear fuel that's being stored in these silos on the beach are likely to never move. And in his opinion, he thinks the NRC does not put public safety first. I mean, that's from the top guy. And if we don't listen to that, then maybe all we need to talk about is radiation monitoring, because we know the damn stuff's going to get into the environment. If we continue this path, we need to just analyze how we're going to deal with the accident and forget about transportation and everything else. We've got to talk about different kind of canisters, different ways of handling it. We need a hot cell on site if there's a leaky canister, that if we can't use a spent fuel pool to remedy that situation. I mean, we have to get realistic about what we're doing and not do a lot of wishful thinking and, you know, outdated movies about things that don't even take into account things we've learned since the 70s. You know, these are higher, hotter, heavier, you know, canisters that we're just pretending like, oh, this is all going to work out fine, and when it doesn't, where are we all going to be? What are we going to say to our future generations and people who could have prevented this? You know, and I do want to thank you, our council member Stephen Schwartz, for being persistent on this stuff. But you know, the only cure for this is prevention, and we got to listen to people that are trustworthy and not the industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Next is Torgen Johnson and then Jeff Steinmetz.
Torgen Johnson, Torgenjohnson. I'm a father of 4. I'm a Harvard-trained urban planner in North County, San Diego. I'm going to give you a quote addressing this man's comment. The Prime Minister, Naoto Kan, we hosted him at 8 events in the United States and Japan. quote, severe nuclear accidents happen, so plan for them, unquote. In a recent KPBS TV interview, the former chairman of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Dr. Gregory Yaskos, said the spent fuel at San Onofre will be buried and left on site indefinitely. Given the opposition in New Mexico to Holtec's centralized storage project and the technical and legal challenges of opening Yucca Mountain, it's imperative that these discussions that you're having with the public be frank and open to address the long-term consequences and environmental impacts of permanent waste storage here at San Onofre. When we do get real with each other, you'll start to appreciate why the dangerous nature of this waste has led to the public's persistence in requesting sensible safety measures and emergency plans for leaking or exploding high-level radioactive waste canisters. Spent fuel pools should be retained on site because they're the only option we have for one of these accidents. The seismic and tsunami risks here are far greater than what Edison's hired geologist has told the public. A recent report presented by Dr. Mark Legg at the 11th National Conference on Earthquake Engineering this June of 2018 describes the offshore and onshore earthquake fault system and tsunami risk at the power plant to be far more serious than Edison's contracted geologist reported. The reason I'm here today is, in this public interest fight, is my family was involved in a coastal access fight back in the 70s. Up in Malibu, private interest fenced off the beach for miles to prevent the public from having access to the beach. And when there was a fight to get an access point, they piled a whole bunch of dog crap on the access point. What we're looking at right now is we're looking at a regulated monopoly that we pay for either as ratepayers or as taxpayers handling this waste, are dumping exactly the same thing, 1,628 metric tons of the most dangerous crap in the world on a beach that my family cherishes. And an accident with that waste could render these beaches inaccessible and the area around it uninhabitable forever. That's what we're talking about here. So, in short, we're asking for the suspension of the continued loading of this fuel plant until we can get sensible on siting and containment. The public is right. You just heard it, everybody. Okay? We're right. We know it's going to be stuck here. Let's start. Number one, containment, get it right. Number two, siting, get it right.
Thank you very much for your comment. Next
Thank you.
is Jeff Steinmetz, and then I see Sarah Brady, you're on the list again, but I saw you were reading your comments, so if you want to share the fuller comments with us, I'll make sure they're part of the public record. So Jeff Steinmetz and then Krista Gostenhofer.
All right, thank you. My name is Jeff Steinmetz. I work in the public sector in that I sell software to help utilities and municipalities and counties to better manage their fleet equipment. A big part of managing that fleet equipment is to actually do preventive maintenance inspections, okay? That helps maintain your assets, it keeps them safe, and it helps them to last longer. So, what we have with the system that's going in and the one that exists today is one that you cannot inspect. No other public sector is doing anything like this. Why is it we're taking one of the most dangerous substances in the world and deciding, okay, we're just going to shoot the crap? So, after what was just said here today, Tom, you got some splaining to do. Seriously, it's an embarrassment. Now, talking about holding that stuff up over that space and the risk of it dropping. One of the things that was mentioned in that video, I should say that phony baloney sales presentation, was that they filled the canister up with water and a couple of steel rods and then crashed it. Well, know this. Mass times velocity equals momentum. It's simple multiplication, okay? The density or the weight of water is 1 gram per cubic centimeter. The density or weight of plutonium is 19.82. So we're looking at about a factor of 19. That's why I say that was a stupid sales presentation. Because you're looking, they're not even doing the math, and they're expecting that all of us can't do any simple math. It's 4th grade stuff. So now, take that example that they gave you filled with water and put the real quantity of weight and fuel into it and drop it from where it was hanging. It's really ugly, Tom.
Thank you very much for your comment. Next is Krista Gossenhofer and then Michelle Anderson. And can you spell your last name?
Gostenhofer. So about the last thing I wanted to do today was drive down from Orange County to come to this meeting. The sky was really dark and had a really bad color. The fires are really bad. The air was bad. It felt really ominous. But I had to realize that it wasn't a nuclear accident. It wasn't a nuclear fire. And so I had to come down here to see what was going on and to speak up. Prevention is what we're trying to do. We don't want to have an incident. In February, you started loading. By the March meeting, my jaw dropped, and it still dropped, from the fact that you had loaded faulty designed canisters. And then you admitted that you could not put them back in the spent fuel pool. But you knew about this since the 1990s. How in the world, Mr. Palmisano, did you approve those Holtec thin-walled canisters when you knew you couldn't inspect them, you couldn't repair them, you can't reload them back into the spent fuel pools? You have absolutely no contingency plan. So I've looked further into NRC documents, and I realized that NRC regulations require that dry storage has retrievability. And as far as I can tell, Edison is not in compliance with your dry storage license. Where is the NRC? Where are you, Mr. Palmisano? I've come to repeated meetings after that, and you haven't discussed that. What are you going to do if there's a problem with a can? I've seen plenty of studies in NRC about chloride stress-induced corrosion and cracking. They know these cans crack. I've seen studies on high burn-up fuel. They know there's dangers with high burn-up fuel. They know the cladding can crack. Hydride gases can be created. The temperature can go up. They are pressure vessels. There's no pressure release valve. And you're talking about transporting these things, and you can't inspect them. You can't transport these things without seeing if that fuel is damaged. I'm just really still trying to pick up my jaw from the March meeting and from the fact that this stuff is going in the ground, 100 feet from the ocean, in an earthquake fault line, tsunami zone. We really would like some real answers to our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next is Michelle Anderson and then William Weigel, Jr. Michelle Anderson, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you to each of you for being here tonight and listening to the concerns of the public. Thank you, Steve Schwartz and David Vickers, for your comments tonight. I really appreciate that you listened and you're speaking up. I'm still in awe of the courage it took for David Fritsch to say what he did and to share what he did. According to the legendary scholar Noam Chomsky, the world is facing potential environmental catastrophe, and not in the distant future. And the only community standing between humankind and catastrophe are the world's indigenous people. The Ahashiman Nation, who are the original people of the land and whose human remains were found on the Song site by Mr. Brock, a Bechtel engineer, back in the late 60s, when the site was being excavated, and were kept hidden from the public until that engineer died and his widow returned those remains per his request to the Ahashiman people back in 2007. They were finally reburied last year. We wouldn't all be here tonight if that man had had the courage to share his discovery. I'm not a descendant of the Ahashiman Nation. However, I'm here addressing each of you tonight as a fellow citizen of the earth and asking you to sit consciously and ponder deeply with all of the information and concerns brought forth by all of the individuals making public statements tonight. We have one earth, and we are rapidly destroying it with human miscreations in the name of profit over safety. I have to believe that we all have the same goal in mind. Ultimately, none of us want to see a nuclear disaster happen here. I think it's fairly safe to say all of this talk of safely transporting the waste is a moot point as of now, since there is currently no place to move this spent fuel to. And with all of the bureaucracy involved, it's likely going to be too late when we cut through all the red tape of the political minutiae we face. Since I started attending these meetings years ago, I have heard many opinions expressed. More and more people are becoming aware of this ticking time bomb and speaking out articulately, factually, and with the passion of a community that sees the situation as absolutely urgent. And common sense shows us a looming potential apocalyptic scenario. I think we all felt that tonight. I'm absolutely for SCE being fiscally responsible and using the over $4 billion of ratepayer money by providing thicker, monitorable casks, providing a hot cell on site, real-time radiation monitoring, moving the waste across the freeway and higher up away from a rapidly eroding shoreline, and keeping the spent fuel pool in place until a hot cell is on site. I'd like to thank all the people here tonight that stood up and shared and expressed from their hearts, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for your comment. Next is William Weigel Jr. and then Viraj Prema.
Good evening. I'm William Weigel. It's W-E-I-G-E-L, and I'm a retired Air Force lawyer, judge advocate, with over 20 years of military law experience. I'm very concerned about why our nation would put the largest privately held nuclear waste dump on a military installation. Anyone with any basic knowledge of military law knows that it's unlawful to target civilians. But when you put the equivalent of 100 Chernobyls on a military installation, the equivalent of 700 nuclear missiles on a military installation, you've just targeted 8.5 million Californians. And I don't know of anyone in Southern California that signed any agreement to be held as hostage in the event that our nation goes to war against another nation. And I think I'm bringing this to your attention because I think anyone that has any capability of moving that nuclear waste off that beach needs to do it as quickly as possible. And the only other thing I would encourage the Navy to do is to ask their targeting experts whether or not there's something that they can do to harden that facility so that those 5/8 of an inch thick stainless steel 400,000-pound canisters that are like an eggshell can withstand an attack by an enemy of this nation. And I think the Navy owes that to the community, to the people that live here, and also to the Marines that are on Camp Pendleton to answer those kind of questions. How safe is it having all that nuclear waste so compacted, so close together? How are we going to prevent enemies of this country in the event that we go to war from attacking that particular location? And if they do so, Southern California is going to be toast. And here we are, we're talking about safety, 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 and we can see what a farce safety is. But when you put your biggest nuclear waste dump on a military installation, it's like a fighter going into the ring and sticking his nose out and asking for someone to punch him in the face. we're asking to be punched in the face. It's the stupidest thing I have ever seen in my life. And somebody needs to be held accountable for it. Thank you.
Thank you. And sir, since you introduced yourself as a lawyer, if you have a legal opinion or have formulated one about how this is the legal equivalent of targeting civilians with nuclear weapons, could you share that with us just offline? You mentioned that in your comments, but if you could share that with me offline, I would love to see that and be able to share that with the panel. Viraj Prema, and then Lindsay Bazette.
Good evening. Viraja, V-I-R-A-J-A, Prema, P-R-E-M-A. I'd like to start with expressing my appreciation for this open forum of conversation in which we can all feel a safe space to speak our truth and be heard. Thank you. I'd also like to thank fellow concerned citizen David Fitch for his share. And what moved me to tears was him saying, I promised my daughter I would do so. While my two sons sit in the front lobby, I stand here thinking of what is your why? Who would you promise? Who would you want to be in the highest integrity for and show up to, no matter what? Even if you were going to lose your job, even if there was going to be a loss of revenue, even if it meant humbling ourselves to saying we don't know what to do or we need to scratch a plan and start over. The enormity of what to do with spent nuclear fuel is so profound that I don't think we can expect anybody to be perfect yet. Gary Lantham said, if you feel there is a safety concern, you are encouraged to raise it. This is part of the industry. Thank you. There is much concern for legitimate reasons. The video from the 1990s indicated a cask being used differently, a different one than we have at San Onofre, or proposed to be at San Onofre. The test did not include fire. That test was done separately, and they are supposed to be done together. What if there is a fire and a crash? The Baltimore train tunnel fire burned for 5 days. Temperatures reached about 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The canisters are required to only withstand fire of 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit for 1/2 of an hour, 30 minutes. Shipping nuclear waste across the country is extremely dangerous. I'm happy they had success with 260 or so canisters by truck once upon a time. I'm really grateful for that. But can we avoid doing it twice? Can we please choose a location that can withstand more of the test of time, such as move it to the Mesa, as Sarah Brady mentions over and over, and many others. Thank you for this consideration.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next is Lindsay Bazette, and then our final public comment from Rich Van Every.
Good evening, panel members. My name is Lindsay Bazette, spelled B-A-Z-E-T-T. I am a UC Davis trained biologist and a mother of 4 healthy children residing in North County, San Diego. At the last CEP meeting in June, I shared the perspective of a young family living in southeast New Mexico that is staunchly opposed to the proposed long-term radioactive waste repository near their home. To reiterate, they and many other families, including from First Nation, Navajo, and Apache tribes, do not consent to the permanent dumping of San Onofre's 40 years of radioactive waste buried underground within their already radioactively contaminated land. Tonight, I want to share with you some background on my family, of which I am a 3rd-generation Californian, which has a long-standing history of honoring and protecting the public's access to and preservation of the pristine coastline here on the West Coast. In 1967, my grandfather, Oregon State Representative Sidney Bassett, introduced House Bill 1601, which would later come to be known as the Beach Bill, to a legislative session with zero political support. At the soul of this bill was the imperative to ensure unrestricted public access to Oregon's pristine 362-mile coastline from development, privatization, and destruction of its natural resources. My grandfather kept this bill alive despite abandonment and retaliation by many in his party, stating, "The people of this state who can only afford a tank of gas and a picnic basket have the right to spend a day with their children on the beach without having to rent a motel room or pay a toll." Finally, in June of 1967, the bill was passed and signed by Oregon's 30th governor, Tom McCall, who stated, "No local selfish interest should be permitted, through politics or otherwise, to destroy or even impair this great birthright of our people." This bill became the precedent of coastal access laws here in California and throughout the nation, contributing to the creation of California's own Coastal Commission. In the spirit of Oregon's Beach Bill, which just celebrated its 50-year anniversary, and in memory of my grandfather, Sidney Bassett, I ask you to listen to your fellow citizens and community members who are spending their free time tonight advocating for the health, safety, and unrestricted access to our pristine beaches here in San Diego and Orange County. We are children, young adults, mothers, fathers, grandparents, and your fellow Californians who have the same zest for life that you do. Please help us to protect our California coastline from a high-level radioactive waste canister accident by suspending the current transfer of spent nuclear fuel into deficient 5/8 of an inch thick stainless steel canisters upwind of 8.5 million residents without a viable emergency evacuation plan. And do everything possible to ensure that this beautiful birthright that we all share is preserved for all current and future generations of Californians. Thank
you very much for your comments. Last tonight is Rich Van Every. A little confused. What's happening here?
Hi.
Oh, hi.
It's me. All right. So Van Every is two words, Vanevery. I'm a native of North County. Grew up here, and I do want to acknowledge the heartfelt comments that have been made tonight, and I really hope they're landing home with you all. This is a big deal. Tonight's a big night. I remember coming to my first CEP meeting, the first one of this year, and hearing people complain about how nothing, not one thing, had been accomplished or done or progressed after 4 years of meetings. So I almost didn't want to come tonight. I'm like, this is just a puppet show. This is just a decoy. This is like, yeah, we're going to entertain you public, but we're not really going to do anything about it. And I've been feeling very emotional about this situation, especially after the KUSI report, saying how, yeah, no, really, probably nothing's going to get done. They're just going to leave it there and let the government try and figure out what to do about it. Well, an earthquake or a tsunami or some accident is imminent here. So this is really, really urgent in my heart, and I just want you guys to really feel that. Okay. I have no comments about the transportation issue. I feel like it shouldn't have even have made it on the up for consideration tonight. We need to talk about taking the money that's available now and getting these thick-walled casts going immediately. How's that going to happen? I don't know. Start building a hot cell next week. You have the money. I don't want to hear about any stories about how your shareholders' profits aren't going to be, happy. This is a joke. I love what Donna said. Let's use that money and let's put it to good use immediately. Let's find a way. California the public utilities apparently has the ability to make that happen. So this is the kind of conversation I think we really need to shift to. I also want to ask Edison why they shut down their cybersecurity. I think that was a really faulty move. I want to understand, sorry I lost my place here. I would like to encourage everyone to submit a public comment to the California Lands Commission, which it's going to end at the end of this month, to give their opinion, and I really am not in favor of that passing, and I really hope that this process is halted until it can be done right. I want to acknowledge Torgan for everything he had to say tonight, and everybody really, but most of all, Mr. Fish, you're my new hero, and I really hope you guys are going to wake up tomorrow with a different mindset on what needs to happen and how urgent this situation really is. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. So, did you want to sign up?
I tried to.
Okay, consider yourself signed up, but you need to tell us who you are.
My name is Michael Edmund Malulani Kamehameha Odegaard, and I want to honor Mel Vernon and thank you for everybody who's come. I feel very proud to be in the presence of all of these earth-carrying people, and I wanted to share a mele that came to me the night of Fukushima. Mana ka kai o kai lua kona Malaila ka koinoho iho ai awe akula iko ka ko o mana o ana ya oi Yapana. That's a kanikau, a song, a dirge, mourning for Japan. And this art came to me that night, and I just wanted to share that with you to say thank you for your concern and to recognize that this is an international event, and what you do will have great implications for the many nations in this affected area. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments and your dirge. If you could share that art electronically, we can also make it part of the official record. So thank you very much.
Could I make one last comment? One sentence?
No, please, because the moment we change the very briefly, Gene.
I just want to say, David is a hero, and I hope he will not be punished, and I hope he has a job tomorrow, and I hope that he's listened to his concerns for safety.
Thank you very much for your comments. So, please, we, as is always the case, are beyond time, but as also as always the case, we're going to take some time to answer some questions here. Before I turn the floor to Steve and to Dan, I want to just say two things. First, can we put on the list of things that need to get discussed right now, the Extreme Events Workshop, because a number of people raised concerns about why aren't we looking at the extreme events and accidents happen and so on. Those are really important comments, and some work is underway with members of the community to work on that. But I think before we go to the other questions, Tom, I need to, with the limits of what you can discuss concerning operational issues and personnel issues, tell us what people need to know right now and also what the plan is to tell them more.
Oh, sure. First of all, the gentleman who brought that up, I'm not familiar with him. I'll assure you I'll go back and make sure whoever he works for, that he is protected. He has a right to voice his concern, and that's important. So, and I credit him for bringing up an issue. What occurred Friday, first of all, nothing was dropped, okay? In downloading a canister, the canister, and I'll bring a graphic next time, and what I'll do is I'll write a letter to the CEP that we can circulate publicly so you have the facts. It's an industrial safety issue. In downloading a canister, the sealed canister has about 9/16, a half inch to 9/16 clearance to go through this ring. It's not unusual that it contacts the centering guides, sometimes comes to rest on the ring. It's got to be recognized, lifted off, the cranes move slightly and recentered. That's what has to happen. That's what did not happen in an effective manner on Friday. The two people involved, and I won't discuss the specifics because they have rights as well, did not recognize that the canister they were lowering hung up. And it took a matter of a number of minutes, our monitor, Edison's monitor, recognized something was not right, brought it to the attention of the contractor doing the job. They then lifted the canister out and recentered it. The industrial safety concern for a drop would be while that canister is sitting on that edge and, let's say, wedged in the download position, by lowering the slings on the crane, could a drop have occurred? Okay. It appears unlikely, but you can't rule anything out, so it's an industrial safety issue in terms of a drop. The canister itself is designed to withstand that, but that doesn't excuse it. So a serious near miss, if you will, in terms of a rigging issue, and I'll be glad to provide more detail. Again, what's important is, you know, the canister was safely set down within an hour of identifying the issue. No risk to the spent fuel or the public, no risk to the workers involved, and error on the part of the crew. So we and the contractor are looking into training, proper instructions, et cetera, and I'll be glad to detail more of that in writing to the panel that you can share
I
with
think
the
it would be
public.
very helpful to detail that, not just the particular incident, but also what the larger process is for detecting, you know, not just this event, but other kinds of events,
Right.
and improving worker training, and both on the nuclear side, but also on the worker safety side. It seems
And
very
that's why I
important.
say we pause periodically to look at what we've learned, improve our procedures, improve our training. This obviously is an issue that we clearly need to act on before we download the next canister, which we will. But as we've gone through the process, we make sure we look back at what has worked and what has not worked.
Okay, thank you very much. Dan and Steve, you're going to put a handful of these questions back to folks, including Gary Lantham. Excuse me, Ray. Steve and Dan? No, he just explained why he didn't. Ray, this is not a formal whistleblower process, okay? And we'll. Okay, Tom, briefly.
Yeah, fair question. There was no risk to spent fuel, no risk to the public. It was a rigging issue that leads to an industrial safety issue. It was unacceptable. I judged we had other comments to discuss tonight and didn't view it as the same level. If you remember in the first meeting we talked about the shim issue that one of the commenters brought up. Didn't rise to the level of affecting the capability of the canister. So my judgment call on that.
Thank Dan and Steve, please.
The NRC, we briefed the NRC on Monday.
Tom, please, I don't think it's helpful in a public meeting to call people ridiculous. He's explained his view as a professional. Sir, I'm speaking. He's explained his view as a professional in this area, overseeing this process and dealing with contractors, and he has also outlined for us how he's going to provide additional information back to the CEP and the public in a very timely way, and I can assure you, sir, that we will make sure that happens. So why don't we allow some of the other questions to be addressed as well. Gary Brown?
Dave, is this on?
Yeah, it's on.
Okay. If I could just kind of make a few comments. I've served on this panel since it started, so I've been here all 4 years. I'm a little disappointed in tonight's meeting because bottom line, we are kind of a reflection, a sounding board of the community, and I don't feel we're keeping up. I don't think our answers are keeping up with the questions. I think that, you know, several meetings ago I asked for maybe a defense in depth 2. You know, we had one several years ago, and it seemed like a lot of questions are based on that, and yet we haven't had it. It's been a heading on our meetings, but a good example tonight is part of my frustration I'm feeling is, in all respect to Tom and what he's trying to do, there's a lot of stuff to cover, but tonight after our transportation discussion, Tom got back up and covered 6 very important issues in 5 minutes. And he might as well not have done it because I don't think anybody learned anything. And he's covering, you know, we say there's an issue, we put it on, we talk about it for a very short period of time, but I don't think tonight we didn't do justice to any of those issues. And you know, I would suggest that maybe we reconsider, reassess how we're doing these presentations. And because I feel that, you know, Donna's been saying the same thing for a long time, others have, and I don't think we're adequately keeping up with answers, and or if we are a sounding board for the public, then I think we need to be a little more responsive to the public. We talked about briefly about Gene Stone's petition, and it was kind of, I got all those emails, it was kind of a two-part petition. It talked about certainly lifetime monitoring, but it talked about a symposium at some point that the public it would be invited to, and we can learn more specifically. Now, we didn't even talk about that tonight, but that's okay. I would like at least somebody to tell me that Edison's going to consider that, and if not, then you know, maybe UCI can do it. That I went to a seminar 5 or 6 years ago after we had cooling rod problems, and they put on a seminar, and that was standing room only. And so, you know, there's other alternatives, but I would like to see our meetings here to become a little robust in dealing with the concerns and dealing with maybe rearranging the schedule so we can better adequately answer questions from our perspective, or Edison's perspective.
Okay, thank you.
I'm done, but
no, that's a fair comment. Yeah. Let me ask Tom. I really need to get Dan and Steve to actually put some of the questions in the spirit of Gary's comments back to folks, including Gary. But I just want to say back to this, Gary, that fair criticism. Let's have some discussions initially offline about format and balance. I'll take responsibility for telling Tom not to put the 6 questions in the front part of his presentation, because I thought it would be useful to hear in a little more detail from Gary on the main topic of tonight's presentation. And so if that was an error and people wanted those 6 items to be earlier and squeeze more of Gary's time, like Gary Lantham's time, then that's a helpful feedback so that we don't, so that we are as responsive as possible. Thanks. Steve and Dan, with the limits of time, which I don't actually know what they are since we're already 15 minutes over, can you put a few of the questions back to the folks here?
Sure, I'll start. But first I really want to touch on the state lands meeting that just happened. You asked me earlier, and so I think I'd like to remind everyone that the State Lands Commission just had their 2 public hearing meetings. And if you're still interested in making a comment, you can do that either through email or in writing. You have till the end of the month. You can, they're specifically looking for elements that may be shortcomings in the plan that was put out. Also, if there are any concerns regarding mitigation, you can address those as well. So now to a question. Tom, you mentioned... Oh, thank you, Donna. August 28th is the deadline. Okay, thank you. You mentioned that the canister did not fall. If it did fall, this is really in reference to Donna, and well, we know that it's designed not to crack. If there had been a leak, what would you have done?
Well, first of all, like you said, the canister did not fall. The canister is designed and analyzed for a fall from approximately 25 feet. So the canister would not have been breached. Now, let's say hypothetically, had a leak occurred,
right.
If any canister is damaged, you immediately do a radiation survey to detect is there any radiation or radioactive material being released. Okay. Then you notify the appropriate authorities if the radioactive material is being released, which would be the NRC, be Orange County, be the state, so they can determine any protective actions. Then you decide how to isolate it as best you can from the environment. And then typically, again, as opposed to an operating reactor, which is at high temperatures and pressures, and all the emergency plans are driven around that, or a Fukushima situation where you have high decay heats in a reactor, typically the contents of a canister are much lower energy, temperature, and pressure. You've got time to plan how you isolate it, ensure the public is protected, and decide what the best course of action is.
And people have said tonight that the only option was hot cell or the only option was to have a spent fuel pool. My understanding is that the main option would be to put it into a transport cask.
Well, a transport cask, some kind of, there was a comment about Maine Yankee. I'm very familiar with them. We work with the Yankee group all the time. They actually bought a canister or cask that they could put a damaged canister in. They haven't had to use it, hasn't been licensed. We're looking at the same thing for each of our canister designs.
Okay, thank you. Please. Steve?
Yes.
Please, Torgen. Steve Swartz, please.
Has Holtec offered to buy the waste from San Onofre?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your comment, sir.
Yes.
The question is whether Holtec has offered to, in effect, do what they're doing at other plants, which is to take title to the spent fuel and the decommissioning of the plant.
No, they have not for San Onofre.
Gary, there are a couple of comments with reference to the applicability of the tests that were run as they relate to the canisters that are placed at songs. Could you, with reference to being full or empty, could you make some comments on that and further explain that, please?
Sure. As I tried to indicate during the presentation, the tests weren't to demonstrate the function of the cask. The tests were to demonstrate the accuracy of the modeling. And so modeling was done on the casks as they were tested, and they were looking at whether or not the models were accurately predicting the outcome for the test conditions. The purpose was to develop models and improve models for further designs and further applications. And so the test wasn't intended to be an exact replication of an actual shipment. It was designed to benchmark the models that were used. And the models were adjusted based on the test results, and they have more accurate models. That was the whole purpose of the testing program.
Excuse me, sir. Steve Schwartz?
Yes.
Sir, the purpose of, as he's just explained, the purpose of the tests was to help validate the models. Okay, Steve Schwartz, please.
Yeah. They want to know what are the plans should you have the problems on the site, and in regards to if there's an accident, you have is there the emergency preparedness personnel already in place to know what they're going to do?
Yes, the site does have an emergency plan. It was changed back in 2015 from an operating reactor plan to a decommissioning plant plan. The plan has criteria, and again, this is one, a 10-second or 30-second answer isn't going to be sufficient. I'll be glad to bring in a topic to explain. The plan basically monitors today the spent fuel pools in the ISFC for a radioactivity release or radiation event, and has criteria at which point the NRC, the state and county are notified so they can determine the protective actions for the local population. That's how the plans are set up today, and they are in effect. The site is staffed 24 hours a day with people with that responsibility to respond if something were to damage the ISFC or the spent fuel pool.
Those questions came up in particular from comments from Ramesh and Danica, and maybe if they and others have this same question, they can send it in to this email address or to me, and let's make sure we get folks pin sites onto the website where this information, because this relates to the point Gary Brown just raised earlier about defense in depth. The whole idea was to create this evergreen growing set of information around what defense in depth really means, but clearly somehow that is not working in getting that information out. Marnie, Magda, did you want to comment on this?
I'm not sure if this is appropriate. I'm just concerned that so many people mentioned moving the fuel to the mesa. And so I wanted to make sure we just have the Cleveland Forest fire right now. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone understands that the other side of the mesa has already had fire come and destroy buildings on that side of the mesa. And it's also had flooding take out buildings on that side of the mesa. So when you want to move fuel to the other side, you are not finding a safer place for it.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much. I want to ask Tom. Excuse me, can I ask Tom Coughlin, who is the representative from Camp Pendleton, and it is their land, to comment in this area? And in addition, Tom, some comments were made tonight to the effect that you were not plugged in to decision-making on Camp Pendleton, so I don't know to what degree you want to respond to that, but in past meetings, you've made a variety of comments about what the Navy is actually planning here, whether the Mesa site is open for becoming a spent fuel storage site, and so maybe you could comment very briefly about that.
You've got several things at work here. First, about 4 months ago, the the Deputy Commandant of the Marine Corps for Installations and the Chief General Counsel of the Marine Corps sent 2 letters, one to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to advocate for removal of the fuel rods as quickly, all the fuel off site as quickly as possible. That the Marine Corps' position was do it safely, do it quickly, and remove the fuel permanently. Where the fuel is stored on site is the decision of the NRC, and the Marine Corps, as part of the executive branch of the government, has responsibilities to do Marine Corps things and not a whole lot of technical expertise on nuclear things, certainly not nuclear power generation things. Nuclear defense things, sure, that's decontamination. That's a different thing entirely. But in terms of where the site, where that fuel goes, we rely upon the expertise of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to say what is safe, what is technically possible, what is good science, and how we can get it out of here as quickly as possible. The Marine Corps' position is get it out of here as quickly as possible. Now, the next thing I've heard several times is what about the security issue? The other letter went to Southern California Edison for a detailed review, both unclassified and classified, of the scenarios that you might have to deal with in terms of on-site response, emergency response to an emergency that might occur, to the deactivated, decommissioning Songs plant, including the on-site storage as is currently envisaged. I think that.
Okay, thank you.
Does that get it?
Thank you very much. Steve and Dan, other major questions that need to be addressed tonight? There's a lot that are going to have to be addressed after tonight, and I want to say a few words at the end.
Tom, there are a couple of questions with reference to monitoring the heat as well. Wondered if you want to comment on that now, and maybe that could be something.
Well, just let me clear one thing up. On my slide, I talked about monitoring the ISFC in general, from a security standpoint, ventilation and heat standpoint, and radiation standpoint. Monitoring the temperature does nothing to do to monitor for a crack or release of radioactivity. So whoever made that comment, if my slide was unclear or my statement unclear, I wanted to make sure everybody understands. You monitor temperatures to make sure that the heat is being removed from the canister. You monitor radiation and radioactive contamination to make sure the canisters are intact and not leaking something. And then in the future, we'll do the inspections to make sure there are no cracks forming or through wall, even if it's not releasing radioactivity. So it's a complicated issue, but temperature monitoring is not done to look for radiation leaks. That's probably the biggest thing I want to clear up.
Yeah, and the last one I've got is that someone indicated that the regulations require dry storage to be able to be retrieved, and these don't have that capability. So are you in violation of the regulations?
No, so again, this is one warrants a longer term discussion. The original licenses or certificates retrieved retrievability. Now, at the last meeting where we talked about unloading, or the first meeting of the quarter where I talked about the shim issue and unloading a canister, I may have confused the issue. I was not aware at the time that anybody had unloaded a canister. We have found one site that has unloaded a bolted canister. It is a similar process to a welded canister, okay? And so it can be done. It's done typically in a spent fuel pool. So the NRC has changed their view of things in their continued storage rule, which I'll be glad to bring in and discuss more thoroughly. The NRC does not require decommissioned plants to maintain spent fuel pools, even with dry cask storage. And I can refer you to David Lockbaum of the Union of Concerned Scientists, who would tell you a spent fuel pool is not needed for an ISFSI-only or decommissioned site. Now, this warrants a broader discussion where there's chance for good dialogue and discussion on this. We're in compliance today. What Arriva is doing on one of the older licenses for our older system is cleaning up some of these requirements that the NRC no longer insists upon. I think that's where the comment came from.
So, excuse me.
Yeah, stop lying, please.
Please.
Your license, item 8 on your certificate of approval requires the ability to unload back in the pool. That license is active now.
That I agree with that. I agree with it, and that's what Arriva's.
You're going to go and get an exemption after you get the pool out of the pool.
Donna, let me suggest that there's a constructive way. Let me suggest that there's a constructive way to handle this, which is, why don't you send me a letter with your concerns about Article. No, then we'll discuss it publicly. We'll discuss it publicly, and well, actually, let me make a proposal, just inspired by Gary Brown's comments earlier, which is, it may well be that we should have our next meeting not on a topic, but that we instead should have our next meeting on the 8 or 9 things that keep coming up, for which there's a range of views, and some people think those questions have been answered, other people don't, and so have a much more sustained, focused conversation that's not on a particular theme, and that could be a constructive thing for us to do. I would welcome comments from the panel members, comments from the public about whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, and so please send them in to me so that we can have a structured conversation. I want to just close, just a second. That's please. I understand that. Okay, I need to put 2 questions to Gary Lantham before we close. I understand the sentiment, sir. I understand the sentiment. Gary, I want to ask just 2 questions to you that came up tonight that I think are very important while we have your expertise here. One of them is a question that is about whether the record with spent nuclear fuel shipments is misleading because basically a tiny fraction, maybe 1% of that fuel has been moved and the rest of it remains to be shipped. And the other question is about the hazard analysis that you showed, about whether that is based on the historical record, because if one bases everything on the historical record, that's not a real representation of the real hazards. And so I'm wondering if you could say a couple more sentences about how that kind of hazard analysis gets done, and if it's just calibrated to the historical record or if it's based on a larger fault analysis.
The hazard analysis is not done just on the historical record of accidents that have happened. It's done on the analytical work about what the consequences of a hypothetical accident are. The NRC requires that for spent fuel transport, unlike other hazardous materials, you have to analyze for severe hypothetical accidents, not just for normal conditions of transport. And so even though a small portion of fuel has been shipped, the analysis has been done both for the high burn-up fuels and other fuels for these severe hypothetical accidents. And so there is coverage for the full range of material that needs to be shipped within the construct of the regulatory frame. Okay. So there is coverage there. It's not just based on what has happened to date.
So I want to close by just commenting on 2 efforts that are underway right now that didn't get as much attention tonight as they should have. One of them is that there has been a petition and a lot of very important discussions in the communities about extreme events, these extreme hazards of a whole range of types. What are the worst things that could happen? What would be the impacts? What are the remediations, and so on? That's a very important conversation. That conversation is now taking shape. We had a meeting planned earlier this week that got rescheduled because some folks needed more time to gather documents. It's now looking like it's going to happen in October, the planning meeting, and there will be a workshop that the CEP sponsors this fall on exactly this topic so that we can look at extreme events, including public comment and some structured interaction and dialogue and so on. So that's the agenda that we're working on. We have made a special point of inviting several members of the of the community who have been organized around this in various ways to help with the planning of that workshop, and that process just takes a little bit longer, but I think it's really important because it's one of the different ways of engaging the community. Related to that meeting agenda is going to be some discussion around radiation effects, which is part of the petition that Gene Stone and others have been involved with, and that relates to the other activity that's underway, which is real-time monitoring. This is very, very important. A bunch of us are spending a lot of time on this. We have put a lot of pressure on Edison to be responsive about this and to come up with a game plan, and clearly this is going to be far beyond what the law requires them to do, and I think it's important that they be responsive to the public in that domain, and a lot of people have made a lot of comments about that tonight. I do want to underscore that if and how this is done, it has to be done in a way that makes scientific sense and has integrity to it. So we have to be a little careful that this doesn't come across as a Bigaigi advertising campaign. I had a great time soldering my Bigaigi, and other people have them and so on. My guess is that the requirement for calibrated instruments and auditable data will mean that they're going to be using different kinds of technologies. And so let's go into this conversation with an open mind about how we create real-time information available to the public that's credible is the key standard, and be mindful that the standard that's going to be applied by people in the industry, including Tom Palmisano and his colleagues at Edison, is going to be a standard of industrial-grade equipment, which includes the capacity to audit, the capacity to calibrate instruments, and so on. So that's a very important, we have to be mindful of everybody's different perspectives on this as that conversation unfolds, because we could easily talk past each other and that would not be a constructive thing to do. I want to apologize profusely for running 35 minutes over tonight, but we've had a lot of important things that have been raised, and clearly one of the messages tonight is that we've got to find a way to have an even fuller discussion of some of these questions in addition to the topics, and so I would welcome your feedback, not just on the substance of what Edison should be looking at and this panel should be looking at, but also on process. And with that, I urge you to drive safely as you go home. Thank you.
Sir, you did an outstanding job of chairing this meeting. So thank you.